Every night across the planet, human activity slows and then stops. Muscles relax, awareness fades. For hours at a time, perception withdraws from the outside world, not because of choice or instruction, but because the body insists on it. This withdrawal happens with remarkable regularity, across cultures, climates, and historical periods, even when resisted, even when inconvenient, even when dangerous. The same pattern reasserts itself, again and again. Welcome to the sleepy scientist. As you settle down to sleep yourself, you are very welcome to stay with this slower exploration. There is something quietly fitting about easing toward rest, while looking more closely at why the body demands it so reliably. And if you feel like it, you can share where in the world you are listening from tonight. It is always grounding to know how far these quiet routines extend. For centuries, physicians and researchers have documented what happens when sleep is delayed, fragmented, or denied. From early medical case notes to modern laboratory studies, careful observation has shown that the need for sleep is not softened by training, motivation, or belief. As the hours without sleep accumulate, the body does not adapt in the way it does to hunger or exertion. Reaction times slow. Judgment drifts, perception becomes unreliable. Eventually sleep intrudes on wakefulness itself, in brief, uncontrollable episodes. In everyday life, rest is often treated as optional, something flexible, something that can be borrowed against or recovered later. But biological evidence points in a different direction, suggesting that wakefulness has limits that cannot be negotiated. This understanding did not arrive suddenly. It emerged gradually as measurements became more precise and long-term patterns became harder to ignore. Sleep revealed itself not as an absence of activity, but as a structured process with measurable effects. Modern research continues to refine this picture, using brain monitoring, physiological measurement, and long-term population data. Across these approaches, the findings remain consistent. The requirement for sleep does not weaken under scrutiny. The purpose here is not to dramatize that requirement or to frame it as a threat. It is to look carefully at what sleep does, how it is enforced, and why the body treats it as essential rather than optional. What emerges is not a story of biological failure, but of coordination. Systems that maintain themselves through cycles of engagement and withdrawal, activity and suspension. With that understanding in place, the question becomes less about whether sleep can be skipped, and more about why it cannot. Sleep appears wherever humans appear, in tropical heat and polar cold, in cities that never fully darken, and in landscapes untouched by artificial light. Across history, across geography, across belief systems that disagree on almost everything else. Wherever humans are found, sleep follows. This consistency is striking because so many other aspects of daily life vary wildly. Diet changes, social structures shift, working hours expand or contract, cultural expectations evolve, yet sleep remains stubbornly present, returning each night with the same quiet insistence, even when circumstances make it inconvenient, even when survival seems to demand otherwise. For most of human history, sleep was not treated as a mystery. It was simply endured, accepted, woven into daily rhythm. People slept when darkness arrived, woke when light returned, and thought little about why this pause was necessary. But as medicine began to measure the body more carefully, that pause started to attract attention. By the 19th century, physicians were noticing something odd. Patients deprived of sleep did not merely complain of tiredness, they became confused. Coordination faltered, emotions became unstable, memory slipped. In some documented cases, extended sleep loss led to hallucinations and physical collapse. Sleep, it seemed, was not a comfort. It was a requirement. Early medical journals began to record these patterns systematically. Hospital patients who were kept awake for observation recovered more slowly. Soldiers deprived of rest showed declines in judgment that no amount of discipline could correct. Factory workers on prolonged night shifts made more errors and suffered more injuries. These were not subtle effects, and they appeared again and again. By the early 20th century, sleep deprivation was no longer seen as merely unpleasant. It was increasingly described as dangerous. Physicians observed that the body did not gradually adapt in the way it does to hunger or physical exertion. Instead, function degraded steadily. Reaction times lengthened. Decision-making became unreliable. The body seemed to resist prolonged wakefulness at a fundamental level. One particularly unsettling finding was that people deprived of sleep often believed they were functioning normally, even as objective measures showed otherwise. Tasks that once felt effortless required intense concentration. Simple mistakes multiplied. This mismatch between confidence and performance became one of the clearest signs that sleep loss interferes with self-assessment itself. These observations challenged a popular assumption of the time, the idea that rest could be traded, postponed, or made up later. Hunger can be ignored for a while, muscles can be pushed beyond comfort, pain can be tolerated. But sleep did not behave like these other pressures. It accumulated, it demanded repayment, and it enforced that repayment on its own terms. As laboratory methods improved, researchers began to quantify this effect. Volunteers kept awake for extended periods showed predictable declines in attention and memory. After enough hours, brief lapses appeared where the brain slipped into sleep for seconds at a time, even while the person remained upright with eyes open. These episodes were not chosen. They simply happened. What made this particularly revealing was that motivation did not prevent them. Rewards did not stop them. Threats did not delay them. The brain entered sleep states whenever it reached certain limits, regardless of intent. This behavior suggested that sleep is regulated by internal mechanisms far older and more powerful than conscious decision-making. By the mid-20th century, sleep research had gained formal footing. Dedicated laboratories began to study sleep as its own biological process, rather than as the absence of wakefulness. Electrodes measured brain activity. Patterns emerged. Sleep was not uniform. It followed structure. It followed rules. What became clear is that sleep is not something humans invented. It is something humans obey. Children fall asleep without instruction. Adults struggle to resist it. No culture has ever successfully removed sleep from daily life. Even societies that attempt to minimize it through social pressure or technology still depend on it completely. This universality raises an obvious question. Why would evolution preserve a behavior that leaves organisms vulnerable for hours at a time? During sleep, awareness is reduced. Reaction to danger is slower. Predators gain advantage. If sleep were optional, it would have been selected against long ago. Yet sleep remains, not only in humans, but in every studied population across recorded history. Attempts to eliminate it have failed not because of lack of effort, but because the body enforces it regardless of circumstance. This enforcement suggests that sleep performs functions so essential that life without them quickly destabilizes. One way to understand this is to think of sleep not as a break, but as maintenance. The body performs many forms of repair and regulation beneath conscious awareness. Breathing continues, temperature is regulated, hormones rise and fall, Sleep appears to be part of this same category, an automatic process that runs whether attention is present or not. Gentle humour sometimes emerges when people speak about sleep as wasted time, a third of life spent unconscious, hours that could be reclaimed, productivity that could be extended. Yet this framing quietly misses the point. Those hours are not lost. They are invested. Without them, waking life begins to fall apart. What early physicians intuited, modern research continues to confirm. Sleep loss affects nearly every system in the body. Cognitive performance declines, emotional regulation weakens, immune responses become less efficient. These effects do not require extreme deprivation. Even modest reductions in sleep duration produce measurable changes. Perhaps most telling is that the body does not negotiate. There is no reliable method for permanently shortening sleep without consequence. Short-term adaptations exist, but they do not remove the need. They merely delay it. Eventually sleep asserts itself. This chapter rests on a simple observation that becomes more unsettling the longer it's considered. Humans do not choose sleep in the way they choose meals or movement. Sleep happens to them. It arrives whether invited or not. It recedes only temporarily when resisted, and it always returns. Understanding sleep begins not with complexity but with acceptance. Sleep is not a habit that can be optimized away. It is not a cultural invention. It is not a preference. It is a biological requirement, enforced quietly, consistently, long before anyone thought to question it. Once that foundation is clear, a deeper question naturally follows. If sleep is so firmly embedded in human biology, how far back does that requirement extend, and how deeply is it woven into life itself? Sleep does not belong to humans alone. Long before language, cities, or recorded history, living organisms were already slipping into recurring states of reduced activity, altered awareness, and internal maintenance. Wherever researchers have looked in the animal kingdom, some version of sleep appears. Among mammals, this is easiest to recognize. Cats curl into prolonged stillness. Dogs cycle between light dozing and deeper rest. Elephants, despite their size and constant need to remain alert, still sleep, even if only for a few hours each day. In laboratory studies and field observations alike, mammalian brains show the same repeating patterns of activity during sleep, regardless of whether the animal lives underground, in trees, or on open plains. Birds, despite their constant motion and high metabolic demands, also sleep. For years this puzzled biologists. Flight requires intense coordination, rapid response, and continuous awareness. Yet birds still surrender consciousness daily. Some species manage this in brief intervals. Others perch and sleep more fully. Certain migratory birds have even been observed sleeping while flying, resting one half of the brain at a time while the other remains alert enough to maintain direction. This ability, known as unihemispheric sleep, is not unique to birds. Marine mammals such as dolphins and certain whales exhibit a similar pattern. One half of the brain enters a sleep-like state while the other remains active, allowing the animal to surface for air and maintain movement. This is not a shortcut that eliminates sleep. It is a workaround that preserves it under extreme conditions. Research into these patterns has been carried out by institutions such as the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology, where long-term studies have examined how sleep adapts to environmental demands without disappearing. The conclusion has remained consistent. Sleep changes its form, but not its presence. Reptiles, once thought to lack true sleep, have now been shown to cycle through distinct brain states that resemble mammalian sleep stages. Lizards, for example, alternate between periods of slow brain activity and bursts of activity that resemble rapid eye movement sleep. These cycles occur even when the animals are isolated from light cues, suggesting an internally regulated process rather than a response to boredom or darkness. Fish present an even more intriguing case. Without eyelids and often in constant motion, they appear perpetually awake at first glance. Yet when researchers measure responsiveness, posture, and brain activity, familiar patterns emerge. Zebrafish, commonly studied in sleep research, reduce movement, respond more slowly to stimuli, and show rebound effects when deprived of rest. When prevented from entering these states, they later compensate with longer or deeper periods of inactivity. Even among invertebrates, creatures far removed from human experience show sleep-like behavior. Fruit flies, for example, enter predictable periods of reduced movement and responsiveness. When deprived of this rest, their cognitive performance declines and their lifespan shortens. After deprivation, they display recovery sleep, spending more time inactive than usual. This rebound mirrors what is seen in mammals. The presence of sleep across such a wide range of species raises an important point. These animals do not share lifestyles, habitats, or nervous system complexity. What they share is ancestry. Sleep, in some form, appears to be inherited rather than invented. In evolutionary biology, traits that persist across vast stretches of time are referred to as conserved. A conserved function is one that natural selection has preserved, because removing it causes harm. Breathing is conserved. Cellular repair mechanisms are conserved. The genetic code itself is conserved. Sleep belongs in this category. Evolution does not tolerate inefficiency lightly. Traits that waste energy or increase vulnerability without benefit are typically reduced or eliminated over generations. Sleep does the opposite of what evolution usually favors. It immobilizes organisms. It dulls awareness. It limits feeding and reproduction. And yet it persists. The only plausible explanation is that sleep provides benefits so fundamental that life without them becomes unstable. These benefits must outweigh the risks of temporary helplessness. Otherwise, species that slept less would have outcompeted those that slept more. That this did not happen tells a quiet but powerful story. Studies comparing species have revealed that sleep duration varies widely. Bats sleep for many hours. Giraffes sleep surprisingly little. Some animals nap in short bursts. Others rest for long, uninterrupted stretches. Yet no species studied so far has been shown to function indefinitely without sleep or a sleep-like state. This variation is itself revealing. Evolution has shaped sleep to fit ecological niches. Predators and prey balance rest against risk. Aquatic animals adjust sleep around breathing needs. Migratory species compress and fragment sleep during long journeys, but none escape it entirely. Marine mammals provide a particularly vivid example. Dolphins cannot fully disconnect from their environment without drowning. Instead, sleep reorganizes itself. One hemisphere rests while the other maintains basic control. Over time, the hemispheres alternate, ensuring that both receive sleep. The requirement remains absolute, even if its expression changes. What this suggests is that sleep is not tied to a specific posture, environment, or behavior. It is tied to internal processes that must occur, regardless of circumstance. When typical sleep is impossible, biology improvises rather than abandons the requirement. Ethology, the study of animal behavior in natural environments, has reinforced this conclusion. Animals allowed to behave freely still enter rest states even when not forced by darkness or fatigue. These states follow predictable timing, they are disrupted by deprivation, and they rebound when delayed. One of the more humbling realizations from this research is that humans are not special in their need for sleep. If anything, humans are less flexible than many animals. We lack the ability to sleep with half a brain. We cannot safely nap while moving at speed. Our solution is simpler. We stop. This broader view reframes sleep as an ancient inheritance rather than a human inconvenience. Long before brains were capable of thought or language, nervous systems were already cycling between engagement and withdrawal. Sleep appears to be part of how complex systems avoid breaking under constant demand. There is gentle humour in the fact that humans, armed with technology and self-belief, often imagine they might be the species to finally outgrow sleep. History suggests otherwise. Nature has been running this experiment for hundreds of millions of years. The result has been consistent. Sleep adapts. Sleep reshapes itself. Sleep compromises when necessary, but it does not leave. By placing human sleep alongside that of birds, reptiles, fish, and insects, its role becomes clearer. Sleep is not a lifestyle choice refined by culture. It is a biological solution refined by time. Seen this way, sleep is not something evolution forgot to remove. It is something evolution worked very hard to keep. From an evolutionary perspective, sleep makes very little sense. An animal that sleeps is not feeding. It is not mating. It is not watching for danger. It is slower to react, easier to catch, and less able to escape. If evolution was simply about constant optimization for alertness and efficiency, sleep would seem like a serious design flaw. And yet, sleep persists. Natural selection is often misunderstood as a process that rewards what is comfortable or pleasant. In reality, it rewards what works. Traits that reduce survival or reproduction tend to fade over generations. Traits that impose costs without sufficient benefit are slowly trimmed away. This logic is ruthless, incremental, and blind to intention. Sleep fails nearly every surface test of evolutionary usefulness. It increases vulnerability. It consumes time. It restricts behavior. It even interferes with feeding in environments where food is scarce. If sleep were merely a byproduct of tiredness or a cultural habit that crept into biology, it would have disappeared long ago. The fact that it has not tells us something important. Sleep must provide advantages so fundamental that life without them becomes unstable, not inconvenient, not slightly worse, unworkable. This idea sits at the heart of evolutionary cost-benefit logic. Any trait that imposes a cost must deliver a compensating benefit. The greater the cost, the greater the benefit must be. Sleep is costly, therefore whatever it does must be essential. Charles Darwin himself did not focus extensively on sleep, but the principles he described apply directly. Traits persist not because they are ideal, but because alternatives fail. If there were a reliable way for complex organisms to function indefinitely without sleep, evolution would have found it. Over hundreds of millions of years it did not. Instead, evolution explored compromise, shorter sleep, fragmented sleep, unihemispheric sleep, sleep time to safer periods, sleep hidden in burrows or underwater, but never elimination. This pattern suggests that sleep is not a weakness evolution tolerated, but a process it actively protected. When circumstances make sleep risky, biology does not discard it. It reshapes it. One way to understand this is to think of evolution as a series of trade-offs, rather than improvements. Every organism balances energy, risk, and repair. Muscles tear and rebuild. Cells accumulate damage and correct it. Nervous systems process information and reset. Sleep appears to sit at the center of this balancing act. If sleep were optional, it would behave like a convenience. It would disappear under pressure. Instead, it behaves like breathing. It can be delayed briefly. It can be modified. But it cannot be removed without consequences that compound quickly. Experimental evidence supports this view. Animals deprived of sleep show rapid declines in performance and health. In laboratory settings, prolonged sleep deprivation has led to immune failure, metabolic disruption, and shortened lifespan. These effects occur even when food and safety are otherwise assured. What is striking is how little deprivation is required to produce measurable effects. Even modest reductions in sleep duration lead to changes in learning, reaction time, and emotional regulation. From an evolutionary standpoint, this sensitivity suggests that sleep supports processes that must occur regularly, not occasionally. Several hypotheses have been proposed to explain why sleep delivers such overwhelming benefits. Some focus on the brain, others on the body as a whole. But they share a common theme. Sleep appears to support survival-critical maintenance rather than optional enhancement. One long-standing idea is that sleep allows the nervous system to reorganize. During waking life, sensory input floods the brain. Decisions are made, memories are formed, neural connections are strengthened and weakened. Without periods of recalibration, this system risks becoming unstable. Sleep may provide the conditions necessary for orderly adjustment. Another hypothesis focuses on energy allocation. Maintaining alertness is expensive. Neurons consume large amounts of energy even at rest. Sleep may allow the brain to shift into modes that prioritize repair and efficiency over responsiveness. This is not inactivity, but a reallocation of resources. There are also hypotheses centered on cellular repair. During wakefulness, metabolic processes generate byproducts that can interfere with cellular function. Clearing these substances may be more efficient when the brain is not actively processing external information. Sleep may create the conditions required for this clearance to occur at scale. Importantly, these ideas are not mutually exclusive. Evolution rarely selects for single-purpose solutions. Traits that survive tend to serve multiple overlapping functions. Sleep may persist because it supports many essential processes at once, making it irreplaceable rather than merely useful. This helps explain why no simple substitute for sleep exists. Resting quietly does not replicate its effects. Closing the eyes while awake does not trigger the same internal changes. Chemical stimulation can delay sleep, but it does not replace what is lost. The body keeps score. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. If sleep performed only one narrow function, evolution might have found an alternative pathway. That it did not suggest that sleep sits at a crossroads of physiology, coordinating systems that cannot easily operate independently. There is a certain irony in how modern culture frames sleep as inefficiency. From the perspective of natural selection, constant wakefulness would be the inefficient state. It would lead to rapid breakdown, reduced survival, and poor reproduction. Sleep, by contrast, stabilizes the system. This reframing helps explain why evolution did not gradually shorten sleep to nothing. Instead, it tuned sleep duration to ecological context while preserving its core role. Predators sleep differently from prey. Large animals sleep differently from small ones, but all sleep. Evolutionary biologists often describe traits like this as deeply conserved, not because they are simple, but because they are foundational. Removing them destabilizes the entire system. Sleep appears to belong to this class. Seen through this lens, sleep is not a flaw in the design of life. It is part of the design itself. A pause that prevents collapse, a withdrawal that allows continuation. Understanding this does not yet explain what sleep does in detail, but it clarifies something just as important. Sleep exists because life without it does not work. Evolution tested the alternative for longer than any human civilization has existed. The verdict was clear. With that in mind, attention naturally turns inward. If sleep has been preserved so carefully across evolutionary time, what exactly is it protecting inside the body and brain? Sleep is not a single state that the body enters and remains in until morning. It is a structured process, unfolding in layers, patterns and repetitions that follow a remarkably consistent internal design. What feels like a smooth descent into unconsciousness is, beneath the surface, a carefully organized sequence of physiological changes. Early observers of sleep assumed it was uniform. The body lay still, the eyes closed. Awareness faded. From the outside, nothing appeared to change. But once scientists learned how to listen to the electrical activity of the brain, that illusion began to dissolve. In the early 20th century, the German psychiatrist Hans Berger developed a method for recording the brain's electrical signals from the scalp. This technique, later called electroencephalography, revealed that the sleeping brain does not go quiet. Instead, it changes its rhythm. When Berger first published his findings in the year 1908, the idea that thought and awareness could be traced through electrical pattern was controversial. Yet over time, the evidence accumulated. Different mental states corresponded to different patterns of brain activity. Sleep, it turned out, had many of them. As sleep begins, brain activity slows. Fast, irregular signals associated with alert thinking give way to more regular, synchronized patterns. Muscles relax, breathing steadies, the mind drifts away from external concerns. This initial phase is often light enough that a sound or movement can bring awareness back quickly. From there, sleep deepens. Brain waves become slower and larger, moving in coordinated pulses. The body becomes harder to rouse, heart rate drops, temperature shifts slightly downward. This stage is not dramatic, but it is profound. The nervous system is settling into a different operating mode. This form of sleep is known as non-rapid eye movement sleep. The name is functional rather than poetic. During these stages, the eyes remain mostly still. More importantly, the brain is not generating the vivid internal imagery that later defines dreaming. Non-rapid eye movement sleep is not one state but several, arranged along a gradient from light to deep. As sleep progresses, these stages blend into one another, marked by increasingly slow and powerful brain rhythms. These rhythms reflect large groups of neurons firing together, then resting together, in a coordinated pattern. The deepest phase of non-rapid eye movement sleep is sometimes described as slow-wave sleep. During this period, responsiveness to the outside world is at its lowest. Sounds may go unnoticed. Movement is rare. Awakening someone from this state often produces confusion and disorientation, as though consciousness must climb back from a great depth. This depth served a purpose. During slow-wave sleep, the brain appears to enter a state focused on internal regulation, rather than external processing. Energy use shifts. Certain hormones are released more strongly. Neural activity follows a rhythm that is difficult to achieve during wakefulness. Then, without warning, the pattern changes. Brain activity suddenly becomes faster and more irregular. The electrical rhythms resemble those seen during waking thought. The eyes begin to move rapidly beneath closed lids. Breathing becomes less regular. Heart rate fluctuates. This is rapid eye movement sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep is paradoxical. From the outside, the sleeper appears deeply unconscious. From the inside, the brain is intensely active. It is during this phase that most vivid dreaming occurs, although dreaming is not exclusive to it. The contrast between non-rapid eye movement and rapid eye movement sleep was one of the most surprising discoveries in sleep science. It showed that sleep is not a gradual slide into deeper unconsciousness, but an alternation between distinct modes of brain function. These two broad categories repeat throughout the night in cycles. A typical cycle lasts roughly 90 minutes, although this varies between individuals and across age. Early in the night, cycles contain longer periods of deep non-rapid eye movement sleep. As morning approaches, rapid eye movement sleep occupies a greater proportion of each cycle. This cycling is not random. It follows a regulated pattern controlled by internal timing mechanisms and influenced by prior wakefulness. Skipping sleep does not eliminate stages, it rearranges them. When deprived, the brain tends to prioritize certain stages during recovery, suggesting that each serves a specific role. Modern sleep laboratories have refined Berger's early work using advanced recording techniques. Electroencephalography remains central, but it is now combined with measurements of muscle tone, eye movement, breathing, and heart activity. Together, these signals provide a detailed map of sleep architecture. What emerges from this research is a picture of sleep as an active process, structured rather than passive. Each stage brings different physiological conditions. Each supports different internal tasks. The body moves between them deliberately, not by chance. This structure also explains why simply lying still does not replicate sleep. The stages require coordinated changes across multiple systems. Muscles must relax while certain brain regions remain active. Hormone release must align with neural rhythms. Temperature and metabolism adjust in synchrony. Sleep architecture changes across the lifespan. Infants spend a much larger proportion of time in rapid eye movement sleep. As development progresses, the balance shifts. Older adults often experience less deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep, leading to lighter, more fragmented rest. Yet the overall structure remains recognizable. Disrupting this architecture has consequences. Fragmented sleep, even if total time appears sufficient, can reduce the amount of deep or rapid eye movement sleep achieved. This helps explain why sleep quality matters as much as sleep duration. The body does not simply count hours, it counts stages. Gentle humor sometimes arises when people speak of wanting to skip the boring parts of sleep and keep the interesting ones. The science suggests this is not an option. Each stage appears to support the others. Removing one destabilizes the whole process. The regularity of sleep cycles also hints at underlying control systems. The brain is not merely shutting down and restarting at random. It is following an internal program, adjusting pace and emphasis based on need and timing. Understanding this architecture matters because it reframes sleep from a vague necessity into a coordinated biological process. It shows that sleep is something the brain does, not something that happens to it. This perspective prepares the ground for a deeper question. If sleep is structured so carefully, with distinct stages and repeating cycles, what organ is responsible for orchestrating this nightly performance, and how does it manage such precise control? For a long time, sleep was described as the brain switching off, a nightly shutdown, a period when neural activity faded and energy use dropped, allowing the mind to rest in the same way tired muscles do. It was a simple idea, and an appealing one. It was also wrong. As soon as scientists gained the ability to observe the sleeping brain directly, that picture began to fall apart. What they found was not silence. but motion, not inactivity, but reorganization. The sleeping brain, it turns out, remains one of the most metabolically demanding organs in the body. Even while consciousness fades, the brain continues to consume a large share of the body's energy. In an adult at rest, the brain typically uses around 1/5 of total energy expenditure, despite accounting for only a small fraction of body mass. During sleep, that demand does not drop to zero. In some regions, it barely drops at all. This discovery challenged a deep assumption. If sleep exists to give the brain rest, why does the brain remain so busy? The answer lies in understanding what kind of work the brain is doing while awake, and what kind of work it can only do when external input is reduced. Wakefulness is dominated by interaction with the environment, sensory processing, decision-making, movement planning, constant evaluation of risk and reward. These tasks require speed and flexibility, but they leave little room for maintenance. Sleep changes the priority list. Modern brain imaging made this clear. With the development of functional magnetic resonance imaging and positron emission tomography, researchers could observe blood flow and metabolic activity across different brain regions in real time. These techniques showed that sleep does not produce a uniform reduction in activity. Instead, it redistributes it. During non-rapid eye movement sleep, activity decreases in some areas involved in conscious awareness and external attention. At the same time, other regions remain active or even increase their coordination. During rapid eye movement sleep, activity in emotional and memory-related areas rises sharply, sometimes approaching waking levels. Studies conducted through institutions such as the National Institutes of Health have repeatedly confirmed this pattern. Nighttime brain scans reveal organized, stage-specific activity rather than global quiet. One way to think about this is to imagine a city at night. Traffic thins, shops close, offices empty. From a distance, the city looks quieter, but behind the scenes, infrastructure work begins. Roads are repaired, systems are updated, waste is collected. The city is not asleep, it is maintaining itself. The brain behaves in much the same way. Metabolic activity during sleep supports processes that are difficult or impossible to carry out during full wakefulness. Neurons adjust their connections. Chemical balances shift. Support cells alter their behavior. None of this requires conscious awareness, but all of it requires energy. This is why describing sleep as neurological rest is misleading. The brain is not resting in the sense of doing nothing. It is resting from interacting with the outside world so it can attend to internal needs. Brain imaging has revealed that certain networks actually become more synchronized during sleep. Large populations of neurons fire together in slow, coordinated waves. This synchrony is rare during waking life, when activity is fragmented by constant sensory input. Sleep allows these large-scale patterns to emerge. These patterns appear to be important. When sleep is disrupted, they fragment. When sleep is shortened, they are incomplete. And when sleep is recovered, the brain often spends extra time restoring them, suggesting they serve a purpose that cannot be skipped. Another striking finding from imaging studies is that sleep does not affect all brain regions equally. Areas involved in vigilance and voluntary control quiet down. Areas linked to emotion, memory, and internal simulation remain active. This selective pattern reinforces the idea that sleep is targeted, not random. Gentle humor sometimes arises when people joke that the brain uses sleep to replay embarrassing moments or strange dreams. While the content of dreams may be peculiar, the underlying activity reflects serious work. Emotional experiences are being processed. Associations are being reorganized. Memory traces are being stabilized. Importantly, these processes are metabolically expensive. They require oxygen. They require glucose. They require coordinated signaling across long distances in the brain. This is not passive idling. It is active reconstruction. The idea that the brain powers down during sleep likely persisted because outward signs are deceptive. The body lies still, eyes are closed, responsiveness is reduced. From the outside, inactivity appears complete. From the inside, it is anything but. This mismatch between appearance and reality has practical consequences. It explains why sleep deprivation affects mental function so quickly. If sleep was simply a pause, skipping it might lead only to tiredness. But if sleep is when critical internal work is done, missing it leaves tasks unfinished. Brain imaging studies support this interpretation. After sleep deprivation, patterns of activity during wakefulness become less efficient. Regions that normally operate independently begin to overlap. Tasks require more effort. Errors increase. The brain compensates, but at a cost. It also explains why stimulants cannot replace sleep. Chemicals like caffeine increase alertness by blocking signals that promote sleepiness. They do not restore the internal reorganization that sleep provides. Imaging shows that while a person may feel more awake, underlying inefficiencies remain. Another important insight from brain imaging is that sleep is not uniform across the brain at any given moment. Some regions may show patterns characteristic of deeper sleep, while others appear lighter. This local variation suggests that sleep is regulated both globally and locally, responding to recent use and demand. For example, brain areas heavily engaged during waking tasks often show stronger slow-wave activity during subsequent sleep. This has been interpreted as a form of targeted recovery. The more a circuit is used, the more maintenance it requires. This idea further undermines the notion of sleep as simple shutdown. Instead, sleep appears to be a time when the brain reviews its own activity and adjusts accordingly. Connections are strengthened or weakened. Resources are rebalanced. Efficiency is restored. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. A brain that interacts constantly with a complex environment must adapt continuously. Without periods dedicated to internal recalibration, errors would accumulate, behavior would degrade, survival would suffer. Sleep provides that recalibration window. The fact that metabolic activity remains high during sleep also helps explain why the body protects it so fiercely. Energy is being invested. Processes are underway. Interrupting them repeatedly carries consequences. This reframing changes how sleep is understood. Sleep is not the absence of brain function. It is a different mode of brain function, one that prioritizes maintenance over interaction, organization over response. Once this is recognized, a natural question arises. If the brain is so active during sleep, what exactly is it working on? What tasks require this unique state, and why are they so difficult to perform while awake? Answering that requires looking more closely at the brain's internal housekeeping and the systems that rely on sleep to stay functional. If sleep were only about rest, the brain might simply slow down and wait for morning. But the reality is more practical and more demanding. The brain is a working organ, and like any working system, it produces waste. Byproducts of metabolism accumulate as neurons fire, signals travel, and energy is consumed. Left unmanaged, these substances interfere with normal function. For a long time, this posed a puzzle. Most organs in the body rely on the lymphatic system to remove waste. Fluids circulate, debris is collected, and unwanted material is carried away. The brain, however, sits behind a protective barrier. This blood-brain barrier shields delicate neural tissue from harmful substances in the bloodstream, but it also limits conventional waste removal. For decades, neuroscientists knew the brain must have a solution, but exactly how it worked remained unclear. That began to change in the early 21st century, when a series of careful experiments revealed a previously unknown system dedicated to cleaning the brain. This system was later named the glymphatic system, a term reflecting its reliance on glial cells and its functional similarity to the lymphatic system elsewhere in the body. Much of this work was led by Maiken Nedergaard and her colleagues. Using animal models and advanced imaging techniques, they observed something remarkable. During sleep, the flow of cerebrospinal fluid through brain tissue increased dramatically. Cerebrospinal fluid normally cushions the brain and spinal cord, providing protection and basic support. But during sleep, it takes on an additional role. It moves through channels alongside blood vessels, washing through the spaces between brain cells and carrying away metabolic waste. What makes this process especially striking is how strongly it depends on sleep. When animals were awake, fluid movement was limited. When they slept, clearance efficiency increased substantially. The brain, it seemed, waited for sleep to take out the trash. One reason for this lies in physical space. During sleep, brain cells subtly shrink, increasing the gaps between them. This expansion allows cerebrospinal fluid to move more freely through neural tissue. When awake, cells remain more tightly packed, restricting flow. The brain is simply less permeable. This difference is not trivial. Measurements suggested that waste clearance during sleep could be several times more efficient than during wakefulness. While exact figures vary by species and experimental conditions, the direction of the effect has been consistent across studies. Among the substances cleared through this process are proteins produced during normal brain activity. Some of these proteins, when allowed to accumulate, are associated with impaired neural signaling. Clearing them regularly appears essential for maintaining cognitive performance. This reframes sleep in a very practical way. Sleep is not just when the brain reorganizes information or processes emotion. It is when the brain cleans itself. Gentle humor sometimes emerges here, imagining sleep as housekeeping time. The analogy is imperfect but useful. During the day, activity takes priority. At night, maintenance moves to the front of the schedule. Trying to do both at once turns out to be inefficient. Why not clean the brain during wakefulness as well? The answer appears to involve trade-offs. Active thinking requires tightly regulated conditions, rapid signaling, precise timing, and stable chemical gradients. Increasing fluid flow during wakefulness could disrupt these processes. Sleep provides a window when external demands are lowered, allowing internal systems to operate more freely. This also explains why waste clearance cannot simply be accelerated during the day. The brain cannot easily multitask at this level. Certain operations require reduced sensory input and altered neural states. Importantly, the glymphatic system does not replace other maintenance mechanisms, it complements them. Cells still manage internal waste continuously. Blood vessels still regulate nutrient delivery, but large-scale clearance appears to depend on sleep. When sleep is shortened or fragmented, this process is disrupted. Waste products accumulate more quickly than they are removed. Over time, this buildup correlates with reduced attention, slower thinking, and impaired memory. These effects often appear before a person feels profoundly tired, suggesting that maintenance failure precedes subjective exhaustion. This helps explain a familiar experience. After poor sleep, the mind feels foggy. Thoughts come more slowly. Concentration wavers. It is tempting to attribute this to simple fatigue, but the underlying cause may be chemical imbalance rather than lack of motivation. Research has also suggested links between impaired waste clearance and long-term neurological health. While this area remains under active investigation, the basic principle is well supported. Brains that clean themselves efficiently tend to function better. The timing of this cleaning is not accidental. It aligns with the architecture of sleep described earlier. Deep non-rapid eye movement sleep appears particularly important for glymphatic activity. The slow, synchronized brain rhythms of this stage coincide with optimal fluid movement. This again highlights the importance of sleep structure. It is not enough to be unconscious. The brain must enter specific states to perform specific tasks. Skipping or fragmenting those states has consequences. Another revealing detail is that the glymphatic system is most active when the body is lying down. Gravity assists fluid movement. This may be one reason why sleep evolved as a horizontal behavior in many species. It is not merely comfortable, it is functional. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. A brain that cannot clear waste efficiently would gradually lose performance. Errors would accumulate. Behavior would degrade. Survival would suffer. Sleep, by enabling this cleaning, protects cognitive capacity. This protection is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It works quietly, night after night, preventing problems rather than fixing crises. When it fails, the effects feel subtle at first. A lapse here, a slowdown there. Over time, they compound. One of the more interesting aspects of this system is that it appears to be regulated by the same biological pressures that control sleep itself. The longer wakefulness continues, the greater the need for clearance, the stronger the pressure to sleep. This creates a feedback loop. Activity produces waste. Waste increases the need for sleep. Sleep enables clearance. Clearance restores function. The cycle resets. This loop helps explain why sleep pressure feels physical rather than psychological. It is not simply boredom or lack of stimulation, it is a growing internal demand for maintenance. Modern lifestyles often interfere with this process. Artificial light delays sleep onset. Fragmented schedules reduce deep sleep. Stimulants mask sleepiness without restoring clearance. The brain continues to produce waste, but the opportunity to remove it shrinks. Yet the system remains patient. Skip one night, and the pressure increases. Skip several, and the consequences become obvious. The brain does not forget its maintenance needs, it waits. Understanding sleep as neural maintenance also clarifies why recovery sleep exists. After deprivation, the brain often prioritizes deep sleep. This is not indulgence, it is repair. From this perspective, sleep loss is not just about lost rest, it is about deferred upkeep. Like any system denied maintenance, the brain continues to function for a while, then begins to falter. This does not mean that every night of poor sleep causes lasting harm. The system is resilient. But it does mean that sleep performs work that cannot be indefinitely postponed. Seeing sleep this way strips away much of the mystery without reducing its importance. Sleep is not an abstract state of unconsciousness. It is a working period dedicated to tasks that sustain the brain's ability to function during the day. Once this role is understood, the next question becomes clearer. If sleep is responsible for maintaining the brain's physical environment, how does failing to maintain that environment affect thinking, memory, and behavior in the short term? That question leads directly into the cognitive consequences of skipping sleep, and why even brief deprivation can leave the mind struggling to keep up. Learning feels like it happens in the moment. Information is heard, read, or practiced, and understanding seems to settle into place. A name is remembered, a skill improves, a fact feels familiar. From the inside, it appears as though memory is formed at the point of experience. Biology tells a different story. What is acquired while awake is not yet a stable memory. It is fragile, temporary, and easily disrupted. The brain records new information quickly, but it does not store it securely until later. That later period, again and again, turns out to be sleep. This distinction matters because it reshapes how learning itself is understood. Waking experience provides raw material. Sleep decides what is kept. One of the earliest clues came from work that predates modern neuroscience entirely. In the late 19th century, the psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus began studying memory using himself as the sole subject. He memorized lists of meaningless syllables, tested his recall over time, and carefully measured how quickly information faded. What he discovered was not encouraging. Newly learned material decayed rapidly. Without reinforcement, much of it disappeared within hours. But there was an interesting irregularity. After periods of sleep, recall improved relative to equivalent periods of wakefulness. Ebbinghaus did not know why this happened. He simply documented that it did. Sleep appeared to protect memory from decay. As neuroscience advanced, this observation was revisited with more sophisticated tools. Researchers began to separate learning from consolidation. Learning refers to the initial encoding of information. Consolidation refers to the process by which that information becomes stable, integrated, and resistant to interference. Crucially, consolidation does not happen efficiently while awake. During waking life, the brain is busy responding to the present moment. New inputs arrive constantly. Attention shifts. Decisions are made. The neural circuits involved in learning are repeatedly overwritten by new activity. This is useful for flexibility but poor for long-term storage. Sleep changes this balance. During sleep, particularly during certain stages, the brain reduces its sensitivity to new input. Sensory gates close. External demands fade. This creates an opportunity for the brain to revisit recent experiences without interruption. Modern experiments have made this visible. When people learn a new task, such as a sequence of movements or a list of words, brain activity in the hippocampus increases. The hippocampus acts as a temporary holding area, rapidly encoding new information. But the hippocampus has limited capacity. It cannot store everything indefinitely. If memories remained there, new learning would quickly crowd out old material. Sleep provides a solution. During non-rapid eye movement sleep, patterns of activity recorded during learning reappear in the hippocampus. Neurons fire in sequences that closely resemble those seen earlier in the day, but compressed in time. This phenomenon is known as replay. Replay is not imagination or dreaming in the everyday sense. It is a physiological process. The brain is rehearsing its own recent activity. At the same time, corresponding patterns appear in the cerebral cortex, where long-term memories are stored. The hippocampus appears to be teaching the cortex, gradually transferring information from temporary storage to more distributed networks. This transfer is slow. It unfolds over repeated sleep cycles. Each night strengthens connections, stabilizes patterns, and integrates new information with existing knowledge. This explains why practice alone is not enough. A student can study for hours, but without sleep, performance often deteriorates. Motor skills practiced late at night improve after sleep, even without further practice. Facts memorized before bed are recalled more reliably the next day. It also explains why cramming is so unreliable. Learning many new things without sufficient sleep overwhelms temporary storage. Without consolidation, much of that information fades. The timing of sleep matters as well. Experiments have shown that sleep shortly after learning is particularly beneficial. Delaying sleep allows interference to accumulate. New experiences overwrite fragile traces before they can be stabilized. This does not mean that learning only happens at night. It means that learning is unfinished business until sleep occurs. Gentle humor sometimes appears here in the familiar experience of waking up with a problem solved. A concept that felt confusing the night before suddenly seems clear. This is not magic, it is consolidation. The brain has reorganized information in the background. Different stages of sleep appear to support different types of memory. Declarative memories such as facts and events benefit strongly from deep non-rapid eye movement sleep. Procedural memories such as skills and habits show improvement after both deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep. Emotional memories also receive special treatment. Experiences with strong emotional content are more likely to be consolidated, and sleep appears to modulate how intensely those emotions are retained. The memory remains, but its emotional charge may be adjusted. This selectivity suggests that sleep is not a passive recorder. It is a filter. Not everything learned is kept equally. Relevance, repetition, and emotional significance all influence what survives. Importantly, this process is disrupted by sleep deprivation. When sleep is shortened or fragmented, replay becomes less organized. Transfer to long-term storage is incomplete. Memory performance suffers. Studies have shown that even a single night of restricted sleep can reduce the ability to form new memories the following day. The hippocampus becomes less responsive. Encoding suffers. It is as though temporary storage is already full. This creates a cascading effect. Poor sleep reduces learning. Reduced learning increases cognitive load. Increased load makes sleep less effective. The cycle feeds itself. What makes this particularly striking is that the brain often does not notice the deficit immediately. Confidence may remain high, even as objective performance declines. People feel capable while forgetting names, misplacing objects, and struggling to concentrate. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Memory consolidation is not about convenience, it is about survival, knowing where food was found, recognizing danger, remembering social relationships. These are tasks too important to leave to chance. Sleep provides the protected window in which this information can be secured. The involvement of the hippocampus also explains why sleep loss affects memory unevenly. Short-term recall may appear intact, while long-term retention suffers. Information feels familiar in the moment, then disappears later. This is because encoding can occur without consolidation. The brain can write temporary notes, but without sleep, those notes are never filed away. Modern neuroscience has reinforced this view using brain imaging and electrophysiological recording. Patterns of coordinated activity during sleep predict later memory performance. Disrupting those patterns reduces retention. Enhancing sleep improves it. The implication is clear. Learning does not end when studying stops. It ends when sleep begins. This reframing challenges common habits. Sacrificing sleep to gain more study time often backfires. The extra exposure cannot compensate for lost consolidation. In many cases, it actively undermines it. Understanding this also sets the stage for broader consequences. Memory is not only about facts and skills, it is also about emotional experiences and personal meaning. How those memories are shaped influences mood, resilience, and mental health. If sleep plays such a central role in stabilizing what is learned, then disrupting sleep does more than impair recall. It alters how experiences are processed and retained. That insight leads naturally toward the emotional and psychological effects of sleep loss, and why memory, mood, and mental health are so closely intertwined. Emotions often feel immediate and spontaneous. A reaction arises, a feeling follows, and the body responds before there is time to think. This speed is useful. It allows rapid decisions, quick social signals, and instinctive responses to threat or opportunity. But speed without regulation is risky. Emotion needs balance as much as intensity. Sleep plays a central role in maintaining that balance. When sleep is reduced, emotions do not simply become weaker or stronger. They become less controlled. Reactions grow sharper. Impulses surface more easily. Small frustrations feel heavier than they should. Pleasant moments may feel exaggerated, while negative ones linger longer than expected. These changes are not subtle, and they are not imaginary. Laboratory studies have shown that even modest sleep deprivation alters how the brain responds to emotional information. Faces that appear neutral after good sleep are more likely to be interpreted as negative after poor sleep. Mild stressors provoke stronger reactions. Emotional resilience thins. At the center of this effect is the relationship between two key brain regions. One is the amygdala, an ancient structure involved in detecting emotional significance, particularly threat. The other is the prefrontal cortex, a region involved in evaluation, restraint, and context. In a well-rested brain, these regions work together. The amygdala reacts quickly, flagging emotionally relevant events. The prefrontal cortex then modulates that response, dampening it when appropriate or amplifying it when necessary. This partnership allows emotion to inform behavior without overwhelming it. Sleep deprivation disrupts this relationship. Research conducted in sleep laboratories, including those at the University of California, has used brain imaging to examine this interaction directly. When participants are shown emotionally charged images after a night of reduced sleep, amygdala activity increases significantly. At the same time, communication between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex weakens. In simple terms, the emotional accelerator is pressed harder, while the braking system responds more slowly. This imbalance helps explain why emotional reactions feel exaggerated after poor sleep. The brain is not generating new emotions. It is failing to regulate familiar ones. The same events occur, but the internal response is less proportionate. This effect extends beyond momentary reactions. Sleep deprivation also alters how stress is processed. Normally, stress responses rise and fall with events. The body releases stress hormones, mobilizes resources, then returns to baseline. Sleep supports this recovery. Without adequate sleep, stress responses linger. Cortisol levels remain elevated longer. The nervous system stays partially activated. Over time, this creates a background of heightened tension, even in the absence of immediate threats. This is why chronic sleep restriction often feels emotionally exhausting rather than merely tiring. The system responsible for calming the body struggles to keep up. Impulse control also suffers. The prefrontal cortex plays a major role in suppressing actions that may feel tempting but carry long-term costs. When sleep is limited, this suppression weakens. Decisions become more reactive. Patience shortens. Regret becomes more common. Gentle humor sometimes emerges in the familiar experience of sending messages late at night that feel perfectly reasonable at the time, only to seem questionable by morning. This is not simply poor judgment. It reflects a brain operating with reduced regulatory capacity. Sleep affects not only how emotions are expressed, but how they are remembered. Emotional experiences are more likely to be consolidated into memory. Sleep helps determine which aspects of those experiences are retained and how strongly they are felt later. When sleep is disrupted, this process becomes uneven. Negative experiences may be encoded with greater intensity, while positive ones receive less reinforcement. Over time, this can bias emotional memory toward the negative, subtly shaping mood. Importantly, these effects do not require extreme sleep loss. Studies have shown measurable changes in emotional reactivity after a single night of restricted sleep. The brain appears to be particularly sensitive in this domain. This sensitivity makes evolutionary sense. Emotions guide behavior. They influence social interactions, threat detection, and decision-making. If emotional regulation fails, survival suffers. Sleep appears to protect this regulation by restoring balance between rapid response and thoughtful control. Another revealing finding is that people are often unaware of these changes. Subjectively, individuals may report feeling emotionally normal after poor sleep. Objectively, their reactions tell a different story. This disconnect mirrors what is seen with cognitive impairment after sleep loss. The brain's self-monitoring systems rely on the same regulatory circuits that sleep deprivation weakens. Confidence remains high even as control declines. This mismatch has real-world consequences. Interpersonal conflict increases. Risk-taking rises. Emotional misunderstandings become more likely. These effects accumulate quietly, often attributed to personality or circumstance rather than sleep. Over longer periods, chronic sleep disruption amplifies these patterns. Emotional volatility becomes more frequent. Recovery from stress slows. Small setbacks feel disproportionately heavy. Enjoyment flattens. This does not mean sleep deprivation directly causes emotional disorders, but it does lower the threshold at which emotional systems become unstable. It removes a layer of protection. Sleep also interacts with emotional learning. Fear responses, for example, are shaped by experience. Learning when a threat is real and when it is not requires precise calibration. Sleep appears to support this calibration by strengthening appropriate associations and weakening inappropriate ones. When sleep is disrupted, fear responses may generalize. The brain becomes less selective. Stress spreads to situations that do not warrant it. This contributes to a persistent sense of unease. The same principle applies to reward. Sleep deprivation can blunt the brain's response to positive stimuli while exaggerating responses to immediate rewards. This combination promotes impulsive behavior and reduces satisfaction. Seen together, these effects paint a consistent picture. Sleep does not simply rest the emotional system, it tunes it. It maintains proportionality. It preserves flexibility. Without sleep, emotional processing becomes noisy. Signals blur. Extremes dominate. Balance is lost. This reframing is important because emotional regulation is often framed as a matter of willpower or personality. Sleep research suggests a more practical foundation. Regulation depends on biology. When that biology is deprived of sleep, emotional control weakens regardless of intention. This understanding also helps explain why emotional stability often returns quickly after sleep is restored. A good night's sleep can soften irritability, restore patience, and reduce reactivity without any conscious effort. The system resets itself. The role of sleep here is not dramatic. It does not remove emotion or dampen feeling. It ensures that emotions remain usable, informative rather than overwhelming. As sleep loss becomes chronic, however, this protective effect erodes. Emotional imbalance stops being a temporary state and begins to feel normal. At that point, the line between everyday emotional difficulty and clinical concern becomes thinner. This is why sleep is increasingly recognized as a foundational pillar of emotional health, not as a treatment in itself, but as a stabilizing force that supports all other forms of regulation. Once emotional balance begins to degrade, other systems are affected. Motivation shifts, perspective narrows, coping strategies weaken. Over time, this can open the door to more persistent mental health challenges. Understanding how sleep supports emotional regulation sets the stage for examining what happens when disruption becomes long-term. When nights of poor sleep turn into months or years, the effects extend beyond mood into deeper aspects of mental health. That progression begins quietly, with subtle emotional changes that are easy to overlook, and gradually reshapes how the mind responds to the world. Sleep and mental health have long been linked in everyday experience. A poor night's sleep leaves the mind fragile. Thoughts loop more easily. Worries feel heavier. Motivation fades. After several nights, even simple decisions can feel overwhelming. For a long time, these effects were treated as side notes, unfortunate but secondary to the main condition. Modern research has steadily overturned that view. Sleep disruption is now recognized as one of the most consistent features across a wide range of mental health conditions. Depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, and others all show strong associations with altered sleep. Not occasionally, not incidentally, but repeatedly across populations, cultures, and study designs. What makes this relationship especially important is that it runs in both directions. In many cases, sleep disturbance appears early, sometimes before other symptoms become obvious. Difficulty falling asleep, early morning waking, fragmented rest. These changes are often dismissed as stress or routine disruption, yet they frequently precede shifts in mood and thinking. At the same time, once mental health symptoms are present, sleep often worsens. Rumination delays sleep onset. Anxiety fragments rest. Mood instability alters circadian timing. Sleep becomes both affected by and contributing to the underlying condition. This two-way relationship makes sleep a unique factor in mental health. It is not merely a symptom to be managed. It is a process that actively shapes psychological stability. Large-scale epidemiological research has made this clear. Studies tracking thousands of individuals over many years have consistently found that chronic sleep disruption increases the risk of developing mood and anxiety disorders. This remains true even after accounting for socioeconomic factors, physical health, and life stress. Research summarized by organizations such as the World Health Organization has highlighted sleep disturbance as a common feature across mental health diagnoses worldwide. This consistency suggests a shared biological vulnerability rather than a coincidence of modern life. Depression offers a clear example. Insomnia is one of its most common features. Difficulty falling asleep, waking too early, or sleeping excessively all appear in different forms of the condition. Importantly, people with persistent insomnia are at significantly higher risk of developing depression later, even if they have no prior history. This challenges the idea that poor sleep is simply a consequence of low mood. In many cases, it appears first. Neurobiology provides a plausible explanation. Depression involves alterations in brain regions responsible for mood regulation, reward processing, and stress response. These same regions rely heavily on sleep for maintenance, recalibration, and chemical balance. When sleep is disrupted, these systems become more unstable. Anxiety disorders show a similar pattern. difficulty sleeping is one of the most common complaints among people with chronic anxiety. Racing thoughts delay sleep onset. Hyperarousal fragments rest. Nighttime becomes an extension of daytime vigilance. But again, sleep disruption is not only an outcome. Longitudinal studies have shown that individuals with chronic insomnia are more likely to develop anxiety disorders over time. Poor sleep appears to lower the threshold for persistent worry by weakening emotional regulation and stress recovery. Bipolar disorder highlights another dimension of this relationship. Changes in sleep often precede mood episodes. Reduced need for sleep can signal the onset of mania. Excessive sleep may accompany depressive phases. Stabilising sleep patterns is often a key part of managing the condition. This does not mean sleep causes bipolar disorder, but it does mean that sleep acts as a sensitive indicator of underlying instability. Disrupting sleep can amplify mood swings. Restoring sleep can help dampen them. Across these conditions, a common theme emerges. Sleep disruption increases variability. Mood becomes less predictable. Emotional responses become more extreme. Cognitive control weakens. The mind loses some of its ability to self-regulate. One reason for this lies in the brain's chemistry. Neurotransmitter systems involved in mood, such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, are tightly linked to sleep and circadian rhythms. Sleep loss alters their balance. Over time, this alters how reward, motivation, and threat are processed. Hormonal systems are also affected. Chronic sleep disruption elevates stress hormones and blunts the normal daily rhythm that helps the body recover from emotional strain. Without this rhythm, stress accumulates rather than resolving. Importantly, these changes do not require extreme deprivation. Partial sleep loss over long periods can produce similar effects. Losing an hour or two of sleep each night may seem minor, but over months or years the impact becomes significant. Gentle humour sometimes appears in the observation that people often treat sleep as negotiable, while protecting other aspects of health. Meals are planned, exercise is scheduled, sleep is fitted in if time allows. Mental health research suggests this hierarchy may be backwards. Sleep is not a luxury layered on top of psychological well-being. It is part of the foundation. This perspective has practical implications. Treating sleep disturbance can improve mental health outcomes, even when other symptoms persist. In some cases, improving sleep reduces the severity of mood symptoms. In others, it increases the effectiveness of therapy or medication. This does not mean sleep alone is a cure. Mental health conditions are complex, shaped by genetics, environment, experience, and biology. But sleep appears to influence how resilient the system is to those pressures. Another important insight from population studies is that sleep disruption often goes unnoticed or untreated. People adapt to poor sleep. They normalize it. By the time mood symptoms appear, sleep disturbance may have been present for years. This delay complicates diagnosis. Sleep problems may be attributed to anxiety or depression, when in fact they have been quietly contributing all along. Understanding sleep as a contributing factor rather than a side effect reframes prevention. Supporting healthy sleep patterns may reduce vulnerability before symptoms escalate. It may slow progression. It may soften severity. There is also a social dimension to this relationship. Modern schedules, artificial light, and constant connectivity fragment sleep on a population level. At the same time, rates of anxiety and mood disorders have risen globally. While many factors are involved, sleep disruption remains a consistent thread. This does not imply a simple cause and effect, but it does suggest that widespread changes to sleep may be shaping mental health trends in subtle ways. From a biological standpoint, this makes sense. The brain evolved expecting regular cycles of rest and activity. When those cycles are disrupted chronically, regulatory systems strain to compensate. Over time, compensation fails. What makes sleep particularly important is that it supports recovery across multiple domains at once. Cognitive, emotional, and physiological systems all depend on it. When sleep falters, the effects ripple outward. This is why sleep disturbance often appears alongside multiple mental health symptoms, rather than in isolation. Irritability, low mood, anxiety, and cognitive fog frequently co-occur. Sleep sits at the intersection of these experiences. Recognizing this does not diminish the seriousness of mental health conditions. It enhances understanding. It highlights a process that can be supported, monitored, and improved alongside other forms of care. As research continues, sleep is increasingly treated as a vital sign of psychological health. Changes in sleep often signal changes in mental state before other symptoms are obvious. Restoring sleep can stabilize systems that have begun to drift. This reframing also reduces stigma. Sleep disruption is a biological process, not a personal failure. It reflects systems under strain, not weakness of character. Seeing sleep this way prepares the ground for a broader view. Mental health does not exist in isolation from the body. The same processes that affect mood also influence physical health, immune function, and long-term disease risk. Once sleep begins to erode psychological stability, it often does not stop there. Its effects extend beyond the brain, shaping how the entire body responds to stress, repair, and daily demand. Understanding that progression requires stepping outside the mind and into the wider physiology of sleep, where its influence continues to unfold. Sleep does not end at the edge of the skull. While its effects on thought, memory, and emotion are often the most noticeable, sleep reaches far deeper into the body. Beneath awareness, it quietly coordinates systems that defend against infection, regulate energy, and protect the heart. When sleep is disrupted, these systems do not fail dramatically at first. They drift. The immune system offers one of the clearest examples. Immunity is not a static shield. It is a dynamic process that balances readiness with restraint. Immune cells must be alert enough to respond quickly to threats, yet regulated enough to avoid unnecessary inflammation. Sleep plays a central role in maintaining this balance. During sleep, the body adjusts the release of cytokines, small signaling proteins that help coordinate immune responses. Some cytokines promote inflammation to fight infection. Others suppress it to prevent damage. Sleep helps time and tune these signals. When sleep is reduced, this regulation falters. Pro-inflammatory cytokines tend to increase, while those involved in targeted immune defense may decrease. The result is an immune system that is noisier, but less precise. This has practical consequences. Studies have shown that people who consistently sleep less are more susceptible to common infections. Exposure to viruses produces higher infection rates among those who are sleep-deprived compared to those who are well-rested. The body notices the loss even when the mind tries to ignore it. Vaccination studies provide another revealing window. People who are sleep-deprived around the time of vaccination often produce fewer protective antibodies. The immune system responds, but less effectively. Sleep, it seems, is part of how immune memory is formed. This makes evolutionary sense. Fighting infection requires energy and coordination. Sleep may provide the conditions necessary for immune cells to communicate efficiently and deploy resources where they are most needed. Sleep also affects inflammation more broadly. Chronic low-grade inflammation is associated with a range of health conditions, from cardiovascular disease to metabolic dysfunction. Persistent sleep disruption is linked to elevated inflammatory markers, suggesting that the body remains in a partially activated defensive state. This constant low-level alertness is costly. Over time, it places strain on tissues and organs that are not designed for prolonged inflammatory exposure. The cardiovascular system is particularly sensitive to this strain. Heart rate, blood pressure, and vascular tone all follow daily rhythms influenced by sleep. Normally, blood pressure drops during sleep, giving blood vessels a period of relative rest. This nightly dip appears to be protective. When sleep is shortened or fragmented, this dip may be reduced or absent. Blood pressure remains elevated for longer periods. Heart rate variability decreases. The cardiovascular system loses some of its flexibility. Large-scale studies have consistently linked chronic sleep deprivation to increased risk of hypertension, heart disease, and stroke. These associations persist even after accounting for factors such as diet, exercise, and smoking. Research tracking populations over many years has shown that people who regularly sleep too little are more likely to develop cardiovascular problems later in life. Importantly, this risk is not confined to extreme cases. Habitually shaving an hour or two from nightly sleep appears sufficient to increase vulnerability. Metabolic health shows a similar pattern. Sleep influences how the body processes glucose, regulates appetite, and stores energy. When sleep is disrupted, these processes drift out of balance. One of the earliest changes observed with sleep loss is reduced insulin sensitivity. Cells become less responsive to insulin, meaning glucose remains in the bloodstream longer. Over time, this pattern increases the risk of developing metabolic disorders. At the same time, sleep affects hormones that regulate hunger and fullness. Reduced sleep tends to increase signals associated with appetite, while decreasing those associated with satiety. People feel hungrier and less satisfied after eating, even when energy needs are already met. This combination promotes weight gain, particularly when poor sleep becomes routine. Importantly, this is not simply a matter of willpower. The body's internal signals are being shifted. Longitudinal studies have supported this connection. Individuals with chronic sleep restriction are more likely to develop obesity and type 2 diabetes over time. These patterns appear across age groups and socioeconomic backgrounds. Public health agencies have taken notice. Research summarized by organizations such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has highlighted insufficient sleep as a population-level risk factor for a range of chronic conditions. Sleep is increasingly recognized not just as a personal habit, but as a public health concern. What makes these findings especially important is that they reflect cumulative effects rather than immediate collapse. Missing a single night of sleep does not cause heart disease or diabetes, but repeated disruption nudges physiological systems away from stability. Sleep supports recovery. It provides windows in which the body recalibrates. Without those windows, small inefficiencies accumulate. Gentle humor sometimes arises in the idea that the body keeps a quiet ledger. Sleep lost is not forgotten. It is recorded in subtle shifts in regulation that only become obvious over time. Another system influenced by sleep is thermoregulation. Body temperature follows a daily rhythm, dipping during sleep. This dip supports metabolic efficiency and cellular repair. Disrupting sleep disrupts this rhythm, adding further strain. Even the gut microbiome appears sensitive to sleep patterns. Emerging research suggests that sleep disruption alters the balance of microbial populations in the digestive tract, which in turn influences metabolism and immune function. While this area is still developing, It reinforces the idea that sleep affects the body as an integrated whole. What ties these systems together is timing. Sleep provides a predictable interval during which certain processes can dominate. Repair, regulation, and recalibration move to the foreground. Wakefulness prioritizes interaction and action. Both are necessary. Problems arise when one consistently replaces the other. This helps explain why the effects of sleep loss often feel diffuse. There is no single failure point. Instead, multiple systems drift slightly out of tune. Energy feels lower, recovery feels slower, illness feels more frequent. The body works harder to maintain balance. Importantly, these effects often remain invisible in the short term. Blood tests may still fall within normal ranges. Symptoms may be mild. This makes sleep disruption easy to dismiss. Yet over years, the cumulative burden becomes clearer. Rates of chronic disease rise, resilience falls, the margin for stress narrows. This perspective reframes sleep as preventative care rather than indulgence. Sleep does not merely restore what was lost during the day, it protects against gradual deterioration. The body's dependence on sleep also explains why attempts to bypass it often fail quietly rather than dramatically. Performance may appear adequate for a time. Underlying systems, however, are absorbing the cost. Restoring sleep often improves physical health markers without any other intervention. Blood pressure stabilizes, glucose regulation improves, immune responses strengthen. These changes can occur surprisingly quickly, underscoring how responsive the body is when given the opportunity. This does not mean sleep is a cure-all. Genetics, environment, and behavior all play roles, but sleep sets the stage on which those factors act. Recognizing this broad influence shifts the focus of sleep research. Sleep is not just about feeling alert or emotionally balanced. It is about maintaining the physical systems that allow life to continue smoothly. The body depends on sleep not as a luxury but as routine maintenance. When that maintenance is skipped repeatedly, wear accumulates. Understanding this prepares the ground for the next layer of regulation. Beneath immune responses, metabolism, and cardiovascular control lies a deeper coordinating system. Hormones rise and fall according to sleep and wakefulness, shaping nearly every process discussed so far. To understand how sleep exerts such wide influence, attention must turn to those hormonal rhythms and the internal clocks that keep them in time. Sleep does more than provide rest or recovery, it sets the schedule. Beneath conscious awareness, the body follows a carefully timed sequence of chemical signals that rise and fall across the day. These signals are hormones, and their timing depends heavily on sleep. Hormones act as messengers. They travel through the bloodstream carrying instructions from one part of the body to another. Some act quickly, others work slowly over hours. What they all share is sensitivity to timing. Release a hormone too early or too late, and its effect can change entirely. Sleep helps prevent that mistiming. One of the most familiar examples is melatonin. Often described as the sleep hormone, melatonin is better understood as a signal of darkness. As light levels fall in the evening, melatonin secretion increases, informing the body that night has arrived. Body temperature begins to drop. Alertness softens. Sleep becomes more likely. Melatonin does not force sleep, but it opens the door. When sleep occurs at the expected time, melatonin follows a predictable pattern. Levels rise in the evening, peak during the night, and fall toward morning. This rhythm helps align many other processes, from digestion to immune activity. Disrupt sleep, and this signal blurs. Exposure to artificial light late at night suppresses melatonin release. Irregular sleep schedules shift its timing. Over time, the body receives mixed messages about when night begins and ends. Cortisol provides a useful contrast. Often called the stress hormone, cortisol also follows a daily rhythm. Under normal conditions, cortisol levels are lowest late at night. They begin to rise in the early morning hours, peaking shortly after waking. This rise supports alertness, energy mobilization, and readiness for the day. Sleep plays a critical role in shaping this pattern. Adequate sleep allows cortisol to fall during the night and rise smoothly in the morning. Fragmented or insufficient sleep disrupts this curve. Cortisol may remain elevated at night or rise too early, contributing to restlessness and fatigue. Growth hormone adds another layer. Despite its name, growth hormone is not only for children. In adults, it supports tissue repair, muscle maintenance, and metabolic regulation. A large proportion of daily growth hormone release occurs during deep sleep, particularly during the first part of the night. This timing matters. Growth hormone supports processes that benefit from reduced external activity, such as cellular repair and protein synthesis. Sleep provides the conditions needed for this release to occur efficiently. When sleep is shortened or delayed, growth hormone secretion is reduced or mistimed. Repair still happens, but less effectively. Over time, this contributes to slower recovery from physical strain and injury. These three hormones illustrate a broader principle. Hormones do not operate in isolation. They follow coordinated schedules, rising and falling in relation to one another. Sleep acts as a reference point that keeps these schedules aligned. At the center of this coordination lies a small but powerful structure deep in the brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Despite its complexity, its role is straightforward. It functions as the body's master clock. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is located in the hypothalamus, just above the point where the optic nerves cross. This location is not accidental. It receives direct input from the eyes, allowing it to detect light even without conscious vision. This information helps synchronize internal time with the external day-night cycle. Based on this input, the suprachiasmatic nucleus coordinates rhythms throughout the body. It sends signals that influence hormone release, body temperature, metabolism, and sleep timing. Peripheral clocks in organs such as the liver, heart, and pancreas take their cues from this central pacemaker. Sleep interacts closely with this system. While the clock helps determine when sleep is likely to occur, sleep in turn reinforces the clock signals. Regular sleep strengthens circadian alignment. Irregular sleep weakens it. Chronobiology research has explored this relationship in detail. Studies supported by institutions such as the National Institute of General Medical Sciences have shown that disrupting sleep timing can desynchronize internal clocks even when total sleep duration remains unchanged. In other words, sleeping at the wrong time can be almost as disruptive as not sleeping enough. This desynchronization has wide-reaching effects. Hormones released out of phase with one another can send conflicting signals. Metabolic processes may be activated when the body is least prepared to handle them. Immune responses may be blunted or exaggerated. One way to visualize this is as an orchestra without a conductor. Individual instruments still play, but without coordination, harmony suffers. Sleep helps the conductor keep time. Gentle humor sometimes appears in the observation that the body seems stubbornly attached to its schedule. Staying up late may feel productive or enjoyable, but the internal clock rarely agrees. The body continues to prepare for night on its own timetable, regardless of intention. This mismatch is particularly evident in shift work. People who work through the night often sleep during the day, yet many hormonal rhythms remain tied to the natural light cycle. Melatonin release may still peak at night. Cortisol rhythms may remain misaligned. The result is chronic internal jet lag. Research has shown that this misalignment contributes to increased risk of metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease, and mood disturbances among long-term shift workers. The issue is not effort or adaptation. It is timing. Sleep also influences reproductive hormones. In both men and women, hormones involved in fertility and sexual function follow daily rhythms. Chronic sleep disruption has been associated with reduced testosterone levels, altered menstrual cycles, and decreased fertility. Again, timing appears central. Even appetite-related hormones follow the sleep clock. Signals that promote hunger and fullness fluctuate across the day and night. Sleep loss alters this balance, increasing hunger signals and reducing satiety. These changes interact with circadian timing, compounding metabolic strain. What makes hormonal timing especially important is that many of these processes are anticipatory. The body prepares in advance. Cortisol rises before waking. Digestive enzymes increase before meals. Growth hormone surges during deep sleep. These preparations depend on reliable timing cues. Sleep provides one of the strongest cues. When sleep timing is stable, hormonal rhythms remain coherent. When sleep timing drifts, coherence erodes. The body continues to function, but less efficiently. This inefficiency often feels like vague discomfort. Fatigue without obvious cause, appetite changes, mood fluctuations. Over time, these sensations may be interpreted as stress or aging. Sleep disruption often sits quietly in the background. Understanding sleep as a timing mechanism clarifies why its effects are so widespread. Hormones influence nearly every system in the body. By shaping hormonal timing, sleep indirectly shapes immune function, metabolism, cardiovascular health, and mental state. This also explains why catching up on sleep is not always straightforward. Sleeping longer at irregular times may restore some rest, but it may not fully realign hormonal rhythms. Regularity matters as much as duration. The body responds best to predictable cycles. Darkness followed by sleep, light followed by activity. Repeating patterns allow internal clocks to anticipate rather than react. This does not mean perfection is required. The system is flexible. Occasional late nights or early mornings are absorbed. Problems arise when irregularity becomes the norm. Seen this way, sleep is less about unconsciousness and more about coordination. It is the anchor point around which daily physiology revolves. Hormones follow the sleep clock because sleep tells the body where it is in time. Once that clock begins to drift, the effects spread outward, touching every process governed by timing. To understand this fully requires stepping back and examining circadian rhythms themselves, not just in humans, but as a fundamental feature of life. That broader view reveals how deeply time is built into biology and why sleep remains one of its most reliable signals. Time is woven into biology far more deeply than it appears. Long before clocks, calendars, or artificial light, living organisms were already keeping track of day and night. This internal sense of time does not rely on conscious awareness. It operates quietly, shaping behavior, chemistry, and physiology whether it is noticed or not. These internal cycles are known as circadian rhythms. The word comes from Latin, meaning about a day, and that description is accurate in a practical sense. Circadian rhythms follow roughly 24-hour cycles, governing when organisms sleep, wake, eat, repair, and respond to their environment. Crucially, these rhythms are not imposed from the outside. They are generated from within. If a human is placed in constant darkness with no clocks, no sunlight, and no external cues, patterns of sleep and wakefulness still emerge. Body temperature still rises and falls. Hormone levels still cycle. Over time, these rhythms may drift slightly, but they do not vanish. The body keeps time on its own. Light acts not as the creator of these rhythms, but as their anchor. Exposure to daylight resets and synchronizes the internal clock each day, keeping it aligned with the external world. Without light cues, the clock free runs. With them, it stays on schedule. This internal timing system exists in nearly all forms of life. Plants open and close leaves on daily cycles. Insects emerge at specific times. Animals become active or retreat predictably. Humans are no exception. For much of the 20th century, scientists knew these rhythms existed, but not how they were built. The idea of a biological clock was widely accepted, yet its physical mechanism remained elusive. Where was the clock? What was it made of? How did cells keep time? The answers began to emerge from unexpected places. In the late 20th century, researchers studying fruit flies identified genes that influenced daily activity patterns. Flies with certain mutations behaved strangely. Their cycles shortened, lengthened, or disappeared altogether. This suggested that timekeeping was encoded at the molecular level. Decades of careful work followed, leading to the identification of a set of genes and proteins that interact in feedback loops. These loops take roughly 24 hours to complete, rising and falling in concentration in a self-sustaining rhythm. This work culminated in Nobel Prize recognition for Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young, whose research helped reveal how molecular clocks operate inside cells. At the core of these clocks is a simple principle. Certain genes produce proteins. As protein levels rise, they eventually suppress the activity of the genes that created them. Over time, the proteins degrade, releasing the suppression, and the cycle begins again. This rise and fall takes about a day. What makes this elegant system powerful is that it exists not just in the brain, but in nearly every cell of the body. The liver has its own clock. So does the heart. So do muscles, the immune system, and the digestive tract. These peripheral clocks are coordinated by a central pacemaker in the brain, but they are capable of keeping time locally. Sleep plays a key role in keeping these clocks aligned with one another. This is where timing becomes as important as duration. It is tempting to think of sleep in terms of quantity alone. How many hours were achieved? Was it enough? But biology is more precise than that. Sleeping at the wrong time sends different signals than sleeping at the right time, even if the total duration is identical. Sleep that occurs during the biological night reinforces circadian rhythms. Sleep that occurs at odds with the internal clock creates conflict. For example, sleeping during daylight hours after a night of wakefulness may restore some alertness, but it does not fully replicate nighttime sleep. Hormonal rhythms may remain misaligned. Body temperature patterns may remain inverted. The internal clocks disagree. This disagreement has consequences. Metabolic processes are timed to expect food at certain hours. Immune activity follows daily patterns. Cognitive performance peaks and dips predictably. When sleep occurs out of phase, these processes are forced to operate at suboptimal times. Research has shown that people who regularly sleep during the day, such as night shift workers, experience higher rates of metabolic and cardiovascular disorders, even when they sleep for adequate durations. The issue is not simply sleep loss, it is temporal misalignment. Gentle humour sometimes appears in the observation that the body is remarkably resistant to schedule changes. Social obligations may demand late nights and early mornings, but the internal clock rarely updates its software willingly. The body continues to operate on evolutionary time. Circadian rhythms also explain why sleep quality can feel different at different times. Falling asleep in the early evening may be difficult even when tired. Falling asleep late at night may feel easier, but waking becomes harder. These sensations reflect the push and pull of circadian signals interacting with sleep pressure. Sleep pressure builds with time awake. Circadian rhythms determine when sleep is most likely to occur. Healthy sleep emerges when these two forces align. This alignment also explains why jet lag feels so disorienting. Rapid travel across time zones shifts the external light cycle faster than the internal clocks can adjust. For days, sometimes longer, internal rhythms remain out of sync with the environment. Sleep occurs at odd times, appetite falters, mood shifts. The body adapts eventually, but the process is slow. Internal clocks adjust by minutes or hours per day, not instantly. During that adjustment, performance suffers. Circadian disruption does not require travel. Artificial light at night, irregular schedules, and inconsistent sleep times all produce smaller versions of the same effect. The clocks drift, signals blur, efficiency drops. What makes circadian rhythms especially important is that they coordinate anticipation rather than reaction. The body prepares in advance. Cortisol rises before waking. Digestive enzymes increase before meals. Alertness increases before activity. Sleep anchors these anticipatory processes. When sleep timing is stable, the body learns what to expect. When sleep timing is irregular, anticipation fails. Systems react late or early. Stress increases. This reframes sleep as a temporal organizer rather than a passive state. Sleep tells the body not only how long to rest, but when to do so. It also clarifies why attempts to compress sleep into irregular patterns often fail. Sleeping fewer hours at inconsistent times disrupts circadian alignment, more than sleeping slightly fewer hours consistently. Regularity protects timing. This does not mean rigid schedules are required. Human clocks are flexible. They tolerate variation. Problems arise when variation becomes chronic and unpredictable. Circadian biology also helps explain age-related changes in sleep. As people age, circadian rhythms often weaken. Melatonin release declines. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented. Internal clocks lose some precision. This contributes to earlier waking and reduced sleep depth. Understanding this shift reframes it as a biological change rather than a personal failing. At a broader scale, circadian rhythms link sleep to nearly every system discussed so far. Hormones follow daily cycles. Immune responses vary by time of day. Cognitive performance fluctuates predictably. Emotional regulation changes across the 24-hour period. Sleep sits at the center of this network. When circadian rhythms are intact, sleep reinforces them, and they reinforce sleep. When disrupted, sleep becomes less effective, and rhythms drift further. This feedback loop explains why chronic circadian disruption is so difficult to correct. Poor sleep timing worsens rhythms. Worsened rhythms degrade sleep. The system spirals until stability is restored. Importantly, circadian rhythms do not disappear when ignored. They continue to run. They simply fall out of sync with behavior. This mismatch between internal time and external demands is increasingly common in modern life. Light is available at all hours. Work and social activity extend into the night. Sleep is delayed, shortened, and fragmented. Biology responds as it always has, not with rebellion, but with strain. Seeing sleep within the framework of biological time changes the question. The issue is no longer whether enough sleep is achieved, but whether sleep is aligned with the body's internal clock. When that alignment holds, systems work efficiently. When it breaks, the consequences spread quietly. Understanding circadian rhythms makes it clear that sleep is not just about rest. It is about timing. And when timing breaks down, the effects ripple through physiology, behavior, and health. The next step is to examine what happens when these rhythms are repeatedly disrupted, not briefly, but as a sustained pattern. That is where the full cost of misaligned time becomes visible. Sleep disruption is often discussed in abstract terms, as though it were a temporary inconvenience that can be corrected with a quiet night or two. In reality, many people live inside ongoing disruptions that repeat day after day. These situations function as large-scale, unintentional experiments, revealing how the body responds when sleep is repeatedly mistimed, shortened, or fragmented. Jet lag provides one of the clearest examples. Rapid travel across time zones forces the internal clock to confront a sudden mismatch between biological time and local light. The body expects night when the sun is up, and day when it is dark. Sleep becomes shallow. Appetite shifts. Mood fluctuates. Concentration drops. What makes jet lag especially instructive is its predictability. The farther the travel, the stronger the effect. Recovery takes time, often several days per time zone crossed. During this period, sleep does not simply return to normal overnight. It improves gradually as internal rhythms realign. Importantly, even when sleep duration appears adequate during jet lag, quality often remains poor. People may sleep for many hours yet wake feeling unrested. This reinforces the idea that sleep timing matters as much as sleep quantity. Shift work extends this disruption into everyday life. Millions of people work through the night or rotate between day and night schedules. Unlike jet lag, where the body eventually adapts to a new location, shift work often prevents full adaptation. The schedule changes again before internal clocks can settle. Occupational health studies have documented the consequences of this pattern. Long-term shift workers experience higher rates of fatigue, metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease, and mood disturbances compared to day workers. These findings persist even when total sleep time is similar. One reason is that shift work forces sleep into biologically unfavorable windows. Daytime sleep occurs when circadian signals promote alertness. Noise, light, and social obligations further fragment rest. Sleep becomes lighter, shorter, and less restorative. Over time, this creates chronic sleep restriction. Not dramatic deprivation, but a steady loss of depth and regularity. The body absorbs this loss quietly at first. Performance appears manageable. Adaptation seems possible. Then subtle changes begin to appear. Reaction times slow. Errors increase. Emotional tolerance narrows. Immune responses weaken. These changes do not occur all at once. They accumulate. Chronic sleep restriction functions differently from acute sleep loss. Missing one night of sleep produces noticeable fatigue and impairment, followed by partial recovery. Chronic restriction produces smaller deficits that stack on top of one another. This stacking effect is often referred to as sleep debt. The term is useful, but imperfect. Unlike financial debt, sleep debt cannot always be repaid in full. Research has shown that after several nights of shortened sleep, performance continues to decline even if individuals feel subjectively adapted. The body does not reset to baseline. Instead, deficits plateau at a lower level of function. When extended sleep is allowed after prolonged restriction, some recovery occurs, but not all systems rebound equally or immediately. certain cognitive and physiological measures remain impaired for days or weeks. This incomplete recovery challenges a common assumption, the idea that sleep loss can always be fixed later. In practice, some consequences linger longer than expected. Real-world data support this. Studies tracking people with chronically restricted sleep show persistent impairments even after periods of extended rest. The system appears to require sustained regular sleep to fully stabilize, not occasional compensation. This has important implications for modern life. Many people operate under the assumption that weekday sleep loss can be balanced by weekend recovery. While this may improve how rested someone feels, it does not fully restore circadian alignment or reverse accumulated strain. Shift workers illustrate this clearly. Even with days off, many do not experience full recovery before returning to night shifts. Sleep patterns remain fragmented. Internal clocks remain misaligned. Jet lag offers a milder version of the same phenomenon. Even after the worst symptoms fade, subtle impairments may persist. The body is still adjusting. Timing remains imperfect. Gentle humor sometimes appears in the phrase sleeping it off. The implication is that sleep acts like an eraser, wiping away accumulated fatigue. Biology suggests a different metaphor. Sleep is more like maintenance. Skip it repeatedly, and wear accumulates. Maintenance restores function gradually, not instantly. Another revealing aspect of chronic sleep disruption is that perception often lags behind impairment. People become accustomed to reduced performance. Fatigue feels normal. Irritability feels justified. Slower thinking feels like aging or stress. Objective measures tell a different story. Reaction times worsen. Attention lapses increase. Memory errors rise. The gap between perceived and actual function widens. This disconnect is especially dangerous in safety-critical occupations. Transportation, healthcare, and industrial settings rely on sustained attention and rapid decision-making. Occupational studies have shown higher rates of accidents and errors during night shifts and extended work hours. These effects do not require extreme sleep loss. Even moderate restriction increases risk. The body does not announce when its margin for error has narrowed. It simply narrows. Sleep disruption also interacts with circadian timing in complex ways. A person may sleep for sufficient hours but at the wrong time, producing misalignment without obvious fatigue. Alternatively, sleep may occur at the right time but be shortened, producing cumulative debt. Both patterns strain the system. Together, they amplify each other. Chronic restriction also alters how sleep itself behaves. Deep sleep may become harder to achieve. Rapid eye movement sleep may fragment. The architecture of sleep shifts in response to deprivation, prioritizing certain stages at the expense of others. This prioritization reflects triage rather than optimization. The brain allocates limited sleep time to what it deems most urgent, leaving other processes undersupported. Over time, this imbalance becomes noticeable. Learning slows. Emotional regulation weakens. Physical recovery lags. Immune resilience declines. What makes chronic sleep disruption particularly challenging is that it rarely has a clear endpoint. Unlike jet lag, which resolves when travel stops, shift work and lifestyle-driven restriction may persist for years. The body adapts in the short term but pays a price in the long term. Importantly, not everyone responds identically. Genetic differences influence vulnerability. Some individuals tolerate sleep loss better than others, at least initially. But population-level trends remain consistent. Chronic disruption increases risk across groups. This variability can be misleading. People who cope well early may assume immunity. Over time, however, differences narrow, the strain catches up. Sleep debt also interacts with aging. As sleep quality naturally declines with age, the margin for disruption shrinks. Recovery slows. The same amount of sleep loss produces greater impact. Understanding sleep disruption as cumulative rather than resettable reframes responsibility. The issue is not a single late night or occasional schedule change. It is the pattern that matters. Sleep loss compounds quietly. Each disrupted night adds a small load. Over weeks and months, that load becomes significant. This perspective also explains why improving sleep often produces gradual benefits rather than instant transformation. Restoring regular sleep does not flip a switch. It allows systems to recalibrate over time. Patience is part of recovery. Seeing real-world sleep disruption as a series of natural experiments helps clarify what sleep is doing when it functions properly. When disrupted briefly, the body compensates. When disrupted chronically, compensation fails. The system bends before it breaks. This prepares the ground for examining more extreme cases where sleep is not merely shortened or mistimed, but nearly absent. In those situations, the limits of wakefulness become unmistakable, and the body's dependence on sleep is revealed with uncomfortable clarity. Wakefulness feels natural while it lasts. Thoughts flow. Perception feels continuous. Attention moves smoothly from one moment to the next. It creates the impression that staying awake is simply the default state, and that sleep is something added on later, almost optional. Biology disagrees. When wakefulness is extended beyond its limits, the breakdown is not subtle. It is not gradual tiredness stretched a little too far. It is a failure of systems that were never designed to remain active indefinitely. Historical accounts of prolonged wakefulness often read as cautionary tales. Long before controlled laboratories existed, physicians, military observers, and clinicians noted that people kept awake for extended periods began to show striking changes. Confusion replaced clarity. Mood shifted unpredictably. Perception became unreliable. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some of the first documented sleep deprivation observations appeared in medical literature. Patients suffering from insomnia or neurological conditions were monitored over days without rest. What emerged was not heroic endurance, but cognitive erosion. As hours turned into days, language faltered. Simple arithmetic became difficult. Attention fragmented. Hallucinations appeared not as dramatic visions but as fleeting distortions. Shadows moved. Sounds seemed meaningful when they were not. The boundary between internal thought and external reality began to blur. These early observations were crude by modern standards, but they revealed something important. Wakefulness had limits, and crossing them produced consistent effects. As sleep science developed, researchers sought to study these limits under controlled conditions. This raised an immediate ethical challenge. Prolonged sleep deprivation is harmful. Deliberately inducing severe impairment carries risk. As a result, modern studies are tightly constrained. Even so, carefully designed laboratory experiments have provided valuable insight. In controlled settings, participants are kept awake under supervision for defined periods. Cognitive tests, brain activity, and behavior are monitored continuously. The goal is not to push people to collapse, but to observe how function changes as wakefulness is extended. One of the earliest and most consistent findings is the rapid decline in attention. Sustained focus becomes difficult after a single night without sleep. Reaction times slow. Errors increase. Tasks that require vigilance show sharp drops in performance. What makes this especially dangerous is that impairment does not increase smoothly. Instead, it appears in sudden lapses. These lapses are known as microsleeps. For a few seconds at a time, the brain enters a sleep-like state even though the person remains upright, eyes open, and apparently awake. During these moments, awareness drops to near zero. Microsleeps are not chosen, they intrude. Electroencephalography recordings show brief bursts of slow-wave activity during these episodes, similar to those seen in deep sleep. The brain simply shuts off parts of itself momentarily. This phenomenon defines a hard boundary. No amount of motivation, caffeine, or willpower can fully prevent microsleeps once sleep pressure becomes intense. The brain enforces rest in fragments when full sleep is denied. Cognitively, the effects are profound. Tasks requiring continuous monitoring, such as driving or operating machinery, become extremely hazardous. A lapse of a few seconds is enough to cause serious accidents. Laboratory studies have shown that people deprived of sleep often underestimate their impairment. Subjectively, they may feel tired but capable. Objectively, their performance tells a different story. This gap between perception and reality is one of the most unsettling aspects of sleep deprivation. The systems responsible for self-assessment are among those that degrade. As wakefulness extends further, higher-level cognitive functions suffer. Working memory weakens. Planning becomes erratic. Decision-making shifts toward short-term rewards and impulsive choices. Complex reasoning becomes difficult to sustain. Language can be affected as well. Word retrieval slows. Sentences lose structure. Communication becomes less precise. These changes are often subtle at first, then increasingly noticeable. Perceptual distortions also become more common. Depth perception may falter. Visual contrast shifts. Sounds may seem unusually loud or emotionally charged. These are not signs of imagination, but of sensory systems losing calibration. In extreme cases, hallucinations appear. These are typically brief and fragmented. A movement at the edge of vision, a voice that fades quickly. The brain begins to fill gaps in sensory input with internally generated content. Importantly, these hallucinations do not require days without sleep. They've been reported after 48 to 72 hours of wakefulness in otherwise healthy individuals. What makes this especially revealing is that these symptoms resemble aspects of certain psychiatric conditions. This resemblance has helped researchers understand how sleep loss destabilizes perception and thought. Modern sleep research, however, does not push participants to these extremes lightly. Ethical guidelines limit the duration and intensity of deprivation. Researchers must balance scientific insight against participant safety. As a result, some of the most striking data on extreme sleep loss come from observational rather than experimental sources. Military operations, endurance events, and medical emergencies provide unfortunate but informative examples. In these contexts, individuals often remain awake under high stress. Performance degradation follows predictable patterns. Mistakes increase. Judgment errors multiply. Emotional volatility rises. What these observations reinforce is that wakefulness is not a resource that can be drawn from endlessly. It is bounded. One of the most revealing aspects of sleep deprivation is how unevenly it affects different abilities. Simple reflexes may remain intact longer than complex reasoning. Habitual tasks may continue while novel problem-solving collapses. This uneven breakdown can be deceptive. Someone may appear functional in routine conversation while being incapable of safe decision-making. Gentle humor sometimes appears in the way people describe this state. Feeling wired but useless. Awake but not really there. These phrases capture the contradiction. The body is conscious, but the mind is no longer reliable. Another important insight from sleep deprivation research is that the brain does not wait politely until collapse. It intervenes early. Microsleeps, lapses, and distortions appear as protective mechanisms. The brain attempts to insert rest wherever it can. This enforcement happens automatically. This enforcement reveals something fundamental. Sleep is not merely encouraged by the body, it is required. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. A brain that allowed unlimited wakefulness would accumulate errors, misjudge threats, and endanger survival. Enforcing sleep protects the organism even against its own intentions. Ethical constraints in modern research exist precisely because the consequences of severe sleep deprivation are so predictable. We already know where the boundaries lie. Pushing beyond them adds risk without much new information. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep is therefore not negotiable. It can be delayed, it can be fragmented, but it cannot be eliminated. This understanding challenges cultural narratives that celebrate sleeplessness as discipline or strength. Biology treats prolonged wakefulness not as achievement, but as failure to meet a basic requirement. The breakdown of wakefulness also explains why recovery from extreme sleep loss is not immediate. After prolonged deprivation, sleep rebounds with intensity. Deep sleep increases. Rapid eye movement sleep expands. The brain prioritizes what was missed. Even then, full recovery may take time. Cognitive performance improves gradually. Emotional regulation stabilizes slowly. The system needs sustained rest to recalibrate. What these limits make clear is that wakefulness operates within strict boundaries. Crossing them produces predictable consequences. Sleep in this light is not a choice layered onto wakefulness. It is a boundary condition, a reset that prevents collapse. Once these limits are understood, the language around sleep begins to change. The question is no longer why sleep feels necessary. It is why wakefulness ends at all. The answer is simple and uncompromising. The brain does not allow continuous operation. It enforces rest when thresholds are crossed. This enforcement is not failure, it is protection. Understanding this prepares the ground for a final shift in perspective. If sleep is enforced by the brain, not negotiated by the mind, then sleep is not something humans choose to do. It is something that happens to them. That realization leads directly to the idea that sleep is compulsory, built into biology as a safeguard rather than a preference. Sleep is often framed as a decision, a choice made at the end of the day, influenced by habits, priorities, or discipline. Stay up late to finish work. Go to bed early to feel better tomorrow. The language suggests control. Biology tells a different story. The drive to sleep does not rely on preference or persuasion. It is governed by a powerful internal system that tracks how long the brain has been awake and how urgently it needs rest. This system is known as homeostatic sleep pressure, and it operates continuously, quietly counting the cost of wakefulness. From the moment waking begins, sleep pressure starts to build. It rises steadily throughout the day, increasing the longer the brain remains active. This pressure does not reset with motivation or stimulation. It does not negotiate. It accumulates. At the chemical level, one of the key players in this process is adenosine. Adenosine is a molecule produced as a byproduct of cellular energy use. Every time neurons fire, energy is consumed and adenosine levels rise. Throughout the day, as the brain works, adenosine gradually accumulates in neural tissue. This buildup has a specific effect. Adenosine binds to receptors that reduce neuronal activity and promote sleepiness. As levels rise, alertness becomes harder to maintain. Concentration fades. Reaction times slow. The the brain begins to signal that rest is required. Sleep clears this signal. During sleep, particularly deep non-rapid eye movement sleep, adenosine levels decrease. The pressure is relieved. The brain resets its sensitivity, allowing wakefulness to feel possible again the next day. This cycle explains why sleepiness follows time awake rather than time of day alone. Stay awake long enough, and sleep pressure becomes overwhelming regardless of circadian signals. Conversely, after sufficient sleep, alertness returns even if the clock suggests it is early. Homeostatic sleep pressure is relentless. It does not care about deadlines, goals, or beliefs. It tracks only biology. This helps explain why willpower cannot override sleep indefinitely. Willpower is a cognitive process. Sleep pressure is chemical. Cognitive processes are among the first to degrade when sleep pressure rises. Trying to outthink a chemical signal rarely ends well. Caffeine offers a useful illustration of this dynamic. Often described as a stimulant, caffeine does not actually add energy to the brain. Instead, it blocks adenosine receptors. By preventing adenosine from binding, caffeine temporarily masks the sensation of sleepiness. The adenosine is still there. The pressure remains. The signal is simply muffled. This is why caffeine feels effective at first, then fades. As adenosine continues to accumulate, it eventually overwhelms the blockade. When caffeine wears off, sleepiness often returns with added force, revealing how much pressure had been building underneath. Research into caffeine has shown that while it can improve alertness and reaction time temporarily, it does not restore the underlying processes that sleep provides. It does not clear adenosine, it delays its effects. This distinction matters. Masking sleep pressure allows wakefulness to continue briefly, but it increases the eventual cost. The longer sleep is delayed, the greater the accumulated pressure becomes. This is also why late-day caffeine can interfere with sleep onset. By blocking adenosine signals, caffeine delays the brain's ability to recognize that sleep pressure has reached its threshold. Sleep may occur later, but the need remains. Importantly, caffeine's effects vary between individuals. Genetics influence how quickly it is metabolized and how sensitive receptors are. Some people tolerate late caffeine better than others. None escape sleep pressure entirely. Homeostatic sleep pressure also explains microsleeps and lapses. When pressure becomes too great, the brain inserts brief moments of sleep whether permission is granted or not. These intrusions occur because chemical thresholds have been crossed. This enforcement reveals the core truth. Sleep is not encouraged by the brain. It is enforced by it. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. A brain that allowed indefinite wakefulness would accumulate errors, misjudge threats, and endanger survival. Enforcing sleep protects the organism even when short-term goals conflict with long-term stability. The enforcement mechanism is layered. First comes subjective sleepiness, then reduced attention, then lapses. Finally, involuntary sleep. Each stage represents escalating intervention. Crucially, these stages are not optional checkpoints. Skipping one does not skip the others. Ignoring sleepiness does not prevent impairment. It simply accelerates the path toward failure. Gentle humor sometimes appears in the idea that one can push through. The phrase implies strength. Biology interprets it differently. Pushing through means operating while impaired, not overcoming the need. Sleep pressure also interact with circadian timing. During the biological night, circadian signals amplify the effects of adenosine, making sleepiness feel stronger. During the biological day, circadian signals counteract it to some extent. This interplay explains why staying awake late at night becomes progressively harder. However, Circadian signals cannot cancel homeostatic pressure indefinitely. They can delay its expression, not eliminate it. This interaction also explains why naps can be effective. Even short periods of sleep reduce adenosine levels slightly, easing pressure. The relief may be temporary, but it is real. The brain responds quickly to rest. At the same time, naps late in the day can interfere with nighttime sleep by reducing pressure too much. Again, the system is precise. It tracks balance continuously. Another important aspect of homeostatic sleep pressure is that it does not fully reset with partial sleep. Short or fragmented sleep reduces pressure only partially. The next day begins with residual load. Over time, this leads to cumulative sleep debt. Pressure never fully clears. Baseline alertness declines. The threshold for impairment is reached more quickly each day. This is why chronic sleep restriction feels different from a single late night. The system is operating under constant strain. Willpower fares poorly in this environment. Motivation may remain high, but capacity declines. Tasks take more effort. Errors increase. Emotional regulation weakens. The experience is often misattributed to stress or workload rather than sleep pressure. Importantly, this process is not linear. Performance does not degrade in a straight line. It falls in steps. Lapses appear unpredictably. This unpredictability increases risk, particularly in safety-critical contexts. From the brain's perspective, forcing sleep is not failure. It is damage control. Understanding this reframes common narratives around sleep. Staying awake is not a demonstration of discipline. It is a temporary override that increases future cost. This also clarifies why no known technique can permanently bypass sleep. Stimulants, motivation, novelty, and stress can delay sleep briefly. None remove the underlying pressure. The brain always collects its due. The enforcement of sleep also explains why recovery requires more than a single long rest. Clearing adenosine and restoring balance takes time. Sleep architecture must normalize. Circadian alignment must stabilize. Hormonal rhythms must resynchronize. This is why sustained regular sleep is more effective than occasional compensation. The system responds to patterns, not one-off corrections. Seen this way, sleep pressure functions like a safety mechanism. It prevents the brain from operating beyond its design limits. It intervenes when thresholds are crossed, regardless of intention. This intervention is not subtle, and it is not kind. It produces lapses, confusion, and eventual shutdown. The message is clear. Sleep is compulsory. The brain does not ask whether sleep's convenient. It does not consider priorities. It enforces rest when chemistry demands it. Understanding this enforcement shifts the discussion away from choice and toward design. Sleep is built into biology as a non-negotiable process, protected by multiple overlapping systems. Once this is understood, the next question becomes cultural rather than biological. If sleep is compulsory, why do societies continue to behave as though it were optional? That question leads directly into the ways modern life attempts to bypass, delay, or minimize sleep, and the consequences that follow when biology is treated as negotiable. For most of human history, the environment did not argue with biology. Light faded in the evening, darkness arrived, activity slowed, sleep followed. This pattern repeated with remarkable consistency, shaped by the rotation of the planet rather than personal preference. Modern life changed that arrangement. Artificial light allows day to continue long after sunset. Screens glow late into the night. Social schedules stretch across time zones. Work, entertainment and communication no longer share a common ending. The environment now invites wakefulness at hours when biology expects rest. This shift did not occur gradually over evolutionary time. It happened quickly, far too quickly for biology to adapt. The human sleep system evolved under conditions where darkness was reliable and light was scarce. Fire provided limited illumination. Candles and lamps extended activity slightly, but not indefinitely. True night still existed. Sleep pressure aligned naturally with the environment. Electric lighting broke that alignment. With the flip of a switch, darkness could be postponed. Over time, this convenience reshaped behavior. Evening activity increased. Bedtimes drifted later. The boundary between day and night softened. Screens intensified the effect. Modern displays emit light enriched in short wavelengths, often described as blue light. This range is particularly effective at suppressing melatonin, the hormone that signals biological night. Exposure to this light in the evening delays the internal clock, making sleep onset harder even when the body is tired. Research has shown that even relatively modest exposure can have measurable effects. Using screens in the hours before bedtime reduces melatonin release, delays sleep onset, and shifts circadian timing. The brain interprets this light as an extension of daytime. Importantly, the brain does not distinguish between sunlight and artificial light in this context. Photoreceptors in the eye respond to wavelength and intensity, not intent. Reading an urgent message at night triggers the same biological response as standing under bright midday sky. This is not a failure of discipline. It is a mismatch between signals and systems. Artificial lighting also changes the rhythm of daily life. Social schedules stretch later. Evening becomes a time for work, communication, and entertainment rather than wind down. Night no longer signals rest. It signals opportunity. Gentle humour sometimes appears in the idea that people now carry portable suns in their pockets. The comparison is exaggerated, but the biological effect is real. Constant access to light erodes the natural cues that once guided sleep timing. This erosion interacts with other aspects of modern life. Work schedules often demand early mornings regardless of late nights. Social obligations extend into hours once reserved for rest. Global communication blurs time zones, encouraging responsiveness at biologically inappropriate times. The result is a chronic squeeze. Sleep is delayed by light and activity, then truncated by obligations. The total amount of sleep shrinks, but just as importantly, its timing drifts later. Research on blue light exposure has consistently shown that evening light delays circadian rhythms. People exposed to bright screens at night tend to fall asleep later, wake later when allowed, and experience reduced sleep quality when forced to wake early. This delay compounds across days. The internal clock shifts, but external demands remain fixed. Sleep becomes misaligned rather than simply shortened. Ancient biology struggles under these conditions. The sleep system evolved to anticipate darkness as a signal to begin internal preparation. Melatonin release initiates changes in temperature, alertness, and metabolism. When light interrupts this signal repeatedly, preparation is delayed or weakened. The body adapts imperfectly. It may learn to sleep later, but when wake times cannot shift equally, sleep duration suffers. This pattern is especially visible in adolescents and young adults, whose circadian rhythms naturally run later. Exposure to evening light and screens amplifies this tendency, while early school or work schedules force early rising. Chronic sleep restriction becomes common. Adults are not immune. Long work hours, late-night communication, and on-demand entertainment produce similar effects across age groups. Technology also alters sleep indirectly. Constant connectivity increases cognitive and emotional stimulation. Messages, news, and social interaction keep the mind engaged late into the night. Even without light, mental arousal delays sleep. The brain struggles to transition from alert processing to rest when input remains high. Sleep pressure builds, but sleep onset is postponed by stimulation. This creates a paradox. The more tired the body becomes, the harder it can be to fall asleep under stimulating conditions. Frustration grows. Sleep becomes effortful rather than automatic. The mismatch between environment and biology is not malicious. Technology did not set out to disrupt sleep. It optimized convenience, productivity, and connection. Sleep disruption emerged as a side effect. Understanding this mismatch reframes modern sleep problems. They are not personal failures. They are predictable outcomes of environmental change. Research has shown that when light exposure is reduced in the evening, sleep timing often improves rapidly. Even small changes such as dimmer lighting or reduced screen use before bed can advance sleep onset and improve quality. Biology responds quickly when signals align. This responsiveness suggests that the sleep system itself remains intact. It has not broken. It is simply receiving conflicting instructions. Another revealing observation comes from studies of populations with limited access to artificial light. In communities without widespread electric lighting, sleep timing remains closely tied to sunset and sunrise. Sleep duration may vary, but circadian alignment is strong. When artificial light is introduced, sleep patterns shift within days. Bedtimes move later. Nighttime activity increases. The biological response is immediate. This rapid shift underscores how sensitive sleep timing is to light. It also highlights how little time biology has had to adapt. The same mismatch appears in shift work and round-the-clock operations. Industrial society requires activity at all hours. Biology continues to expect rest at night. No amount of cultural normalization changes that expectation. Technology also encourages irregular schedules. Streaming services remove fixed broadcast times. Communication tools enable asynchronous interaction. There is always something to watch, read, or respond to. This abundance erodes routine. Sleep timing becomes variable. Regular cues weaken. Regularity matters because the circadian system learns from repetition. Consistent sleep and wake times reinforce alignment. Irregular patterns confuse internal clocks, even when total sleep time seems adequate. The body prefers predictability. Modern life offers flexibility. This conflict often produces subtle consequences. Sleep may feel lighter, waking may feel less refreshing. Energy may fluctuate unpredictably. These effects accumulate quietly. Importantly, technology does not eliminate sleep. It delays it, fragments it, and reshapes it. Biology continues to demand rest. The conflict plays out night after night. Gentle humor sometimes appears in the idea that humans have outsmarted sleep with devices and schedules. The evidence suggests otherwise. Sleep adapts, but it does not surrender. The long-term consequences of this mismatch are now becoming clearer. Chronic sleep disruption is linked to metabolic issues, mood disorders, cardiovascular risk, and cognitive decline. These are not immediate punishments. They are gradual costs. The modern environment did not create these vulnerabilities. It exposed them. From a biological perspective, sleep evolved to operate in a world with reliable darkness and limited stimulation at night. Remove those conditions, and the system struggles. This does not mean technology must be rejected. it means adaptation is required. Adaptation does not involve eliminating sleep or training the body to need less. It involves reshaping environments and habits to respect biological limits. Light can be managed, screens can be dimmed, schedules can be stabilized, evening stimulation can be reduced. These changes do not fight biology, they cooperate with it. Understanding technology versus biology also reframes the question of responsibility. Sleep problems are not solely individual choices. They're shaped by design decisions, social expectations, and economic structures. Acknowledging this shifts the conversation from blame to strategy. The goal is not to return to pre-electric life, it is to recognize that ancient biology still governs modern bodies. Technology operates on timescales of decades. Evolution operates on timescales of millennia. Until those timelines converge, tension remains. Sleep problems in modern society are not signs of weakness. They are signals of misalignment. Recognizing that misalignment opens the door to a more realistic approach. Sleep cannot be eliminated, delayed indefinitely, or replaced. It must be accommodated. Once that is accepted, attention turns away from attempts to bypass sleep and toward ways of living that allow it to occur more naturally within modern constraints. That shift marks the difference between fighting biology and working with it. Understanding this prepares the ground for examining whether sleep can be modified safely, shortened meaningfully, or replaced at all, and why most attempts to do so fall short. The idea that sleep might be reduced, reshaped, or even replaced has long been appealing. If sleep is necessary but costly, then finding a way to need less of it seems like an obvious optimization. Across history, and especially in modern culture, this hope resurfaces again and again. It usually begins with a promise: more hours awake, greater productivity, a life less constrained by biology. The evidence tells a quieter story. One of the most common claims involves polyphasic sleep. Instead of sleeping in one long block, sleep is divided into multiple shorter periods spread across the day. Proponents often describe historical figures who allegedly slept this way, or personal experiments that report short-term success. From a biological perspective, polyphasic sleep is not inherently impossible. Many animals sleep in fragments. Humans, under certain conditions, can adapt to sleeping in more than one bout per day. Napping cultures demonstrate this clearly. The problem arises when polyphasic sleep is presented as a way to dramatically reduce total sleep time without consequence. Controlled studies have shown that while sleep can be redistributed, total sleep need does not disappear. People attempting extreme polyphasic schedules often experience initial alertness followed by cumulative impairment. Deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep become compressed. Cognitive performance declines. Emotional regulation weakens. In many cases, individuals unknowingly accumulate sleep debt while believing they have adapted. Subjective alertness does not reliably reflect objective function. The brain adjusts perception before it restores capacity. Another popular idea centers on so-called short sleepers. These are people who appear to function well on significantly less sleep than average. Stories circulate of individuals thriving on 4 or 5 hours per night, sometimes presented as evidence that sleep need is optional. Here biology offers an important distinction. True natural short sleepers do exist, but they are rare. Research has identified specific genetic variants associated with reduced sleep need without apparent impairment. These individuals do not simply tolerate less sleep. Their biology genuinely requires less. Studies suggest that this group represents a very small fraction of the population. Estimates vary, but well under 1% is often cited. Importantly, these individuals do not choose to sleep less. They wake naturally, feel rested, and maintain normal cognitive and physical function. For everyone else, sleeping less produces measurable deficits, even when those deficits are not immediately obvious. This distinction matters because it separates myth from mechanism. Most people who believe they are short sleepers are not. They are chronically sleep-deprived individuals who have adapted to functioning below baseline. Genetic research into natural short sleep has helped clarify this. Mutations affecting certain regulatory proteins alter sleep architecture and efficiency. These changes allow the brain to achieve necessary processes in less time. This is not compression through discipline. It is a different biological configuration. Crucially, these mutations do not eliminate sleep. They alter its efficiency. Attempts to replicate this through behavior have failed. No training protocol has reliably transformed long sleepers into true short sleepers. Sleep need appears to be largely set by biology, not habit. Claims of sleep replacement often go further. Some suggest that meditation, quiet rest, or pharmacological aids can substitute for sleep. While these practices can improve relaxation and subjective well-being, none have been shown to replace the full range of functions sleep provides. Resting quietly does not trigger the same neural rhythms. It does not produce the same hormonal patterns. It does not activate lymphatic clearance or memory consolidation in the same way. It helps, but it does not replace. Pharmacological approaches face similar limits. Stimulants increase alertness. Sedatives induce unconsciousness. Neither recreates the structure of natural sleep. In many cases, they fragment it. Even advanced medical interventions have not bypassed sleep. In intensive care settings where patients are heavily monitored and supported, sleep disruption often worsens outcomes. Artificial sedation does not produce the same restorative effects as natural sleep cycles. This pattern repeats across attempts. Sleep can be delayed. Sleep can be masked. Sleep can be fragmented. But it cannot be removed without consequence. The appeal of sleep reduction often rests on a misunderstanding of efficiency. If sleep were merely idle time, compressing it would make sense. But sleep is active work. Compressing work without changing the machinery produces backlog, not efficiency. Gentle humour sometimes appears in the observation that people attempting to outsmart sleep often end up negotiating with it instead, promising themselves early nights later, borrowing from tomorrow. The debt always comes due. The history of sleep research reinforces this. Across decades of study, no reliable method has demonstrated the elimination of sleep without impairment. Every attempt either fails outright or reveals hidden costs. Even in cases of extreme motivation, such as military operations or endurance events, sleep cannot be bypassed indefinitely. The brain enforces rest through lapses, errors, and eventual shutdown. This enforcement is not a flaw. It is a safeguard. The desire to reduce sleep is understandable. Modern life rewards wakefulness. Time feels scarce. Productivity is praised. Rest is often framed as indulgence. These pressures create fertile ground for myths. Science responds not with judgment, but with measurement. When sleep is reduced experimentally, deficits appear. When sleep is restored, performance improves. When sleep is eliminated, function collapses. This pattern has held across cultures, technologies, and eras. The rare exceptions prove the rule. Natural short sleepers exist precisely because they are biologically distinct. Their existence highlights how constrained sleep need is for everyone else. Importantly, this does not mean sleep duration is identical for all. There is natural variation. Some people need slightly more, some slightly less. Age, health, and activity level all play roles. But the range is narrow. The idea that sleep can be cut in half without cost does not survive careful testing. This also explains why claims of successful sleep elimination often rely on anecdote rather than data. Subjective experience can be misleading. Objective measures tell a different story. Cognitive testing, reaction time measurements, emotional regulation tasks, and physiological markers consistently reveal impairment when sleep is reduced beyond individual need. The body does not lie, it adapts then degrades. Another revealing point is that attempts to replace sleep often focus on consciousness rather than physiology. If a person feels awake, the assumption is that sleep has been satisfied. But many functions of sleep occur without conscious awareness. Cleaning, repair, consolidation, and recalibration do not announce themselves. Their absence becomes apparent only later. Understanding this shifts the framing. The question is not whether sleep feels necessary. It is whether the processes sleep supports have occurred. So far, every credible line of evidence says no alternative has fully replaced them. This conclusion is not pessimistic. It is clarifying. Sleep is not a design oversight waiting to be optimized away. It is a core feature of complex nervous systems. It persists because it works. Recognizing this does not limit possibility. It sets boundaries. Within those boundaries, sleep can be improved. Its timing can be aligned. Its quality can be protected. Its environment can be shaped. These changes offer real benefits. What has not been shown is elimination. This calm rejection of myth matters because it clears the ground for a more honest relationship with sleep. Instead of trying to outsmart it, attention can turn to understanding it. The long search for sleep replacement has, in effect, reinforced the original insight. Sleep remains necessary because the systems it supports remain necessary. With that understanding in place, the final task is not to ask whether sleep can be escaped, but to step back and see what all of this evidence points toward as a whole. That synthesis brings the story full circle, from ancient biology to modern life, and clarifies why sleep persists despite every attempt to minimize it. Sleep has been approached from many angles throughout this journey, as behavior, as chemistry, as timing, as maintenance, as enforcement. Each perspective reveals something different, yet they all point in the same direction. Sleep is not a preference layered onto life. It is part of how life works. From the nervous system upward, sleep is woven into function rather than added on afterward. The brain does not simply tolerate sleep, it builds around it. Neurologically, sleep is an active state. Brain activity does not fade into silence when consciousness withdraws. Instead, it reorganizes. Networks that compete during wakefulness coordinate during sleep. Patterns that cannot emerge amid constant input finally take shape. Memory traces are stabilized. Emotional responses are recalibrated. Waste is cleared. These are not optional enhancements. They are foundational tasks. Physiologically, sleep extends far beyond thought and feeling. Immune systems depend on it to balance defense and restraint. Hormonal systems rely on it to keep time. Cardiovascular systems expect it to lower strain and restore flexibility. Metabolic systems use it to regulate energy use and storage. These processes do not pause politely when sleep is skipped. They continue under strain, then drift. Evolutionary biology offers perhaps the most decisive perspective. Sleep has been preserved across hundreds of millions of years, across species with wildly different lifestyles, habitats, and nervous systems. Traits that impose cost without benefit do not survive that long. Sleep imposes cost. It reduces awareness. It increases vulnerability. and yet it remains. This persistence is not accidental. Evolution does not keep luxuries, it keeps requirements. Attempts to remove sleep, reduce it dramatically, or replace it have repeatedly failed. They fail not because of lack of creativity, but because they collide with constraints built deep into biology. The brain enforces sleep through chemistry, through timing, through failure when thresholds are crossed. The body enforces sleep through accumulated strain when rest is denied. This enforcement reveals an important distinction. Sleep is not encouraged, it is compelled. Homeostatic sleep pressure builds regardless of intent. Adenosine accumulates regardless of motivation. Circadian rhythms run regardless of schedule. When signals align, sleep occurs easily. When they are resisted, sleep intrudes anyway through lapses, errors, and breakdown. Even technology has not changed this. Artificial light delays sleep. Stimulants mask sleepiness. Schedules compress rest. None of these eliminate the need, they defer it. The cost is paid later, often quietly, sometimes dramatically. What modern research has clarified is not that sleep is mysterious, but that it is integrated. It supports multiple systems at once. That integration makes it difficult to replace. A substitute would need to replicate not one function, but many, all in coordination. That has not happened. It is tempting to frame sleep as negotiable because it is flexible. Timing can shift, duration can vary within limits, patterns can adapt to environment. This flexibility could be mistaken for optionality. But flexibility is not freedom. A bridge flexes under load. It does not float away. Flexibility allows survival under varied conditions. It does not remove constraints. Sleep's flexibility allows it to persist across environments. Its necessity ensures it cannot be discarded. This perspective also explains why sleep problems often feel diffuse. There is rarely a single failure point. Instead, multiple systems drift slightly out of alignment. Attention weakens, mood destabilizes, recovery slows, illness becomes more frequent. Over time, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Gentle humor sometimes appears in how people describe this state, running on fumes, burning the candle at both ends, borrowing sleep from the future. These metaphors persist because they capture something true. The body keeps accounts. Sleep loss is not erased by intention, it is recorded by biology. Understanding sleep as non-negotiable does not mean treating it as fragile or precious. It means recognizing it as ordinary and necessary, like breathing, like eating, like temperature regulation, processes that operate best when unremarkable. This reframing also shifts responsibility. Sleep problems are often interpreted as personal failure, poor discipline, weak routines, lack of willpower. The science suggests a different view. Many sleep difficulties arise from misalignment between biology and environment, not from lack of effort. The solution is rarely elimination. It is alignment. Alignment with light and darkness. Alignment with timing. Alignment with regularity. These adjustments do not require perfection. They require consistency. Importantly, this understanding removes the false hope that sleep can be escaped. That hope has driven decades of shortcuts, hacks, and myths. Its failure has been instructive. Sleep remains because it solves problems nothing else solves as well. This does not mean sleep is identical for everyone. Individual variation exists, needs differ slightly. Age changes patterns. Health influences quality. But the range of variation sits within firm boundaries. No known population thrives without sleep. No reliable method has eliminated it without consequence. No technology has replaced its functions in full. Seen this way, the question shifts. It is no longer why humans sleep. It is why life demands periods of withdrawal from the world. The answer appears to be stability. Complex systems require downtime to remain stable. Continuous operation leads to accumulation of error. Sleep is how biological systems avoid runaway instability. This principle appears everywhere. Cells repair DNA, muscles rebuild, immune systems recalibrate, brains reorganize. Sleep provides the shared window in which these processes can occur together. Removing that window forces systems to compete for resources. Something gives. This is why sleep loss compounds rather than resets. Deferred maintenance accumulates. Recovery takes time. Patterns matter more than isolated nights. It is also why sleep is enforced rather than optional. Systems that wait for permission fail. Systems that intervene protect themselves. The brain does not ask whether sleep is convenient. It does not consider deadlines or ambition. It tracks chemistry, timing, and strain. When thresholds are crossed, it acts. This enforcement is not punishment. It is preservation. Understanding this does not diminish human agency. It clarifies its limits. Agency operates within biology, not outside it. Recognizing those limits allows better decisions, not decisions driven by guilt or optimization, but by cooperation with systems that evolved long before modern life. Sleep is not an obstacle to productivity. It is what makes sustained productivity possible. It is not a waste of time. It is how time remains usable. When this is understood, the framing of sleep changes quietly but fundamentally. Sleep stops being something to manage reluctantly and becomes something to protect pragmatically. This protection does not require ritual or reverence. It requires respect for constraints. Sleep is not optional because the processes it supports are not optional. Memory, regulation, repair, timing, and stability are not luxuries. They are requirements. The body enforces sleep because it enforces survival. With that understanding in place, the final step is not to argue with sleep, but to live in a way that allows it to occur with less resistance. That reflection does not close the story, it settles it. Sleep is not something humans invented. It is something they inherited. And like all inheritances written into biology, it comes with terms that cannot be renegotiated. Sleep remains, not because it is old, but because it works. Sleep does not arrive with urgency. It does not announce itself as a rule or a warning. It arrives quietly, night after night, doing what it has always done, stabilizing, restoring, rebalancing. When sleep is described as enforcement, the word can sound harsh, but the reality is gentler than that. The body does not impose sleep as punishment for wakefulness. It introduces sleep as a correction. A way of returning systems to balance before imbalance becomes damage. This enforcement is quiet because it does not need drama. Biology does not argue its case. It simply continues. Across every system explored, the pattern is the same. Rhythms emerge, pressure builds, release follows, activity alternates with withdrawal. This rhythm is not accidental. It is how complex systems remain stable over time. Sleep sits at the center of that rhythm. It is easy, especially in modern life, to view sleep as an interruption, something that stops progress, something that divides one day from the next. But from the perspective of biology, sleep is not a break in function. It is part of function. Nothing essential happens without pauses. Neural circuits require periods of coordination without interruption. Immune systems require windows for recalibration. Hormones require timing to remain meaningful. Memory requires consolidation. Emotion requires regulation. The body solves these needs not by working faster, but by working differently. Sleep is that difference. Seen this way, sleep is not an inconvenience imposed on waking life. Waking life is the phase that draws from the work sleep performs. This reframing softens the entire conversation around rest. Sleep does not compete with productivity. It supports it. It does not oppose engagement. It makes engagement sustainable. The enforcement of sleep is therefore not rigid. It is responsive. The longer wakefulness continues, the stronger the pull toward rest becomes. The body notices strain before the mind does. It adjusts before collapse is required. That responsiveness is protective. Continuity matters here. Sleep does not reset the body each night as though nothing came before. It carries patterns forward. Good sleep reinforces stability. Disrupted sleep introduces variability. Over time, these patterns compound. This is why sleep feels less dramatic than other biological needs. Hunger announces itself sharply. Pain demands attention. Sleep works in gradients. It nudges rather than shouts. By the time it becomes impossible to ignore, it has been working quietly for hours. That quiet work is easy to overlook. Yet across history, across cultures, across species, sleep remains. Not because it is comforting, but because it stabilizes systems that cannot remain stable otherwise. Biology rarely relies on force when rhythm will do. The rhythm of sleep and wakefulness is one of the oldest rhythms life knows. Long before schedules or devices, organisms align themselves to cycles of light and dark. Those cycles shaped chemistry. Chemistry shaped behavior. Behavior shaped survival. Modern life has not erased that rhythm, it has only complicated it. Even now, when light is available at any hour and activity can continue without pause, the body keeps time. It notices when rest is delayed. It compensates when possible. It intervenes when necessary. This intervention is not a failure of adaptation. It is the boundary of adaptation. There is reassurance in that boundary. It means the body is not fragile. It means it has limits and it protects them. Sleep does not need to be perfected to work. It needs to be allowed. This is perhaps the most calming insight to take away. Sleep is not a performance. It is not something to optimize endlessly or measure obsessively. It is a biological process that unfolds naturally when conditions permit. The body already knows how to sleep. When given regular timing, appropriate darkness, and enough opportunity, sleep tends to return to form. Not instantly, not perfectly, but reliably. This reliability is easy to forget in a culture that celebrates control. But sleep has never required mastery. It has always required permission. Permission to slow, permission to withdraw, permission to stop responding for a while. That permission is not indulgent. It is practical. The enforcement of sleep ensures that this permission is eventually granted, even when consciously withheld. That enforcement is not harsh. It is patient. It waits. Pressure builds, signals intensify, and finally, rest occurs. This patience is itself a form of care. Seen in this light, sleep becomes less something to chase and more something to respect. Not with reverence or ritual, but with understanding. Understanding that sleep is part of continuity, part of rhythm, part of how life remains coherent over time. There is calm in recognizing inevitability. Not inevitability as threat, but as stability. The sun rises, darkness follows, sleep comes, wakefulness returns. These cycles do not demand belief. They operate regardless. The body does not ask whether sleep fits into plans. It incorporates sleep into survival. This is not a flaw to overcome. it is designed to cooperate with. When that cooperation happens, sleep fades back into the background where it belongs. Not dramatic, not alarming, simply present. And when it does not happen, the body responds, quietly at first, then more insistently, always with the same aim, restoration. The enforcement of biology is quiet because it does not need to persuade, it does not threaten, it does not negotiate, it simply maintains balance. Sleep remains because balance requires it. As wakefulness gives way to rest, there is no need to solve anything, no need to push understanding further. The processes described do not require vigilance, they continue on their own. Sleep arrives not as an ending, but as a continuation of the same rhythm that carries life forward. That rhythm does not rush, it does not hurry toward outcomes, it repeats because repetition works. Tonight, as every night, biology will do what it has always done. It will slow what has been active. It will restore what has been strained. It will prepare what comes next, quietly, without urgency and without asking permission.